Hey guys, tonight we wander back nearly 1,000 years into a world of dimly lit halls, flickering torches, and hearts that fluttered under heavy velvet sleeves. You step where wooden floors creak, where perfume smells more like crushed herbs than store shelves, and where romance is less about texting back quickly and more about surviving plague years long enough to even think about a wedding. You probably wouldn't survive this century's dating scene, no. Not the apps, the actual mud, fleas, and obligation-filled love lives of the medieval world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community stretches across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself at the heavy wooden gates of a castle courtyard. The air smells like damp straw, iron, and distant roasting meat. You can almost hear the clatter of hooves on stone, the rhythmic clang of blacksmiths at work. Around you, banners flutter in the chill wind reds, golds, greens, each carrying the symbol of a noble family whose bloodlines are apparently as precious as holy relics. Nobody here swipes left or right. Instead, alliances and landholdings decide who falls in love with whom. You wander past servants carrying baskets of rushes to scatter on the floors, and you realize that the idea of romantic ambiance looks different here. Candles drip wax in smoky corners, dogs nap openly in hallways, and dinner conversations feature everything from poetry to livestock prices. Still, even among political marriages and arranged betrothals, there's a glimmer of genuine affection, a stolen glance, a poem tucked behind a shield, a lace token stitched in secret. Dating, such as it was, didn't follow the script of modern love stories. Back then, everything came with rules. A noblewoman's virtue was guarded like the castle's treasure, and her suitors were often men she barely knew but whose names carried power. You can picture yourself at some grand feast where a troubadour sings about courtly love, a kind of refined, unattainable passion that's mostly about poetic longing, not, actual hand-holding or anything scandalous. Historians still argue whether courtly love was real emotion or just an aristocratic performance, a social joke dressed up in rhymes. But the fact remains, people whispered, blushed, and daydreamed just the same. You might lean in and ask someone their favorite song, but here, they'd exchange glances over a shared goblet of watered wine, just subtle enough that the priest 2 tables away wouldn't frown. The first thing you notice is how small the world feels. Villages are no bigger than a handful of streets, and there's no anonymous flirting in a city crowd. Everyone knows everyone's grandmother. So, if you have a crush, half the parish finds out before the week's over. Privacy, let's say, is theoretical. You catch yourself thinking, maybe love letters would have been safer, but then again, if a messenger drops one on the road, that's basically your whole relationship on public display. A cool breeze rolls in, and you hear the echo of a lute strumming. The melody is soft, but piercing something about a lady in a tower and a knight whose armor shines like morning dew. There's even a bit of comic relief in it. Minstrels back then were like medieval mixologists of emotions, blending tragedy, flattery, and maybe one well-timed joke about flatulence. Yes, humor helped love survive, even under steel and ceremony. You walk through the great hall, catching fragments of conversation lords boasting about falconry, ladies murmuring gossip about someone's betrothal gone wrong, servants ducking to dodge spilled ale. You brush against a tapestry woven with the image of a unicorn, an age-old symbol of purity, and catch yourself smirking at the irony. So much effort to look sacred, while human hearts underneath were all doing the same thing they do now, racing, hiding, scheming, hoping. A bell rings from the chapel. That sound anchors life here, the rhythm of prayers, meals, even courtship. The idea of dating for fun would sound scandalous. Instead, marriage means contract signed, alliance made, dowries exchanged. But don't think affection didn't exist. In personal diaries, rare glimpses that survive some lovers wrote in heartbreakingly modern tones worry, jealousy, joy. They just expressed it in Latin or Old French, which makes even simple, I miss you, sound like scripture. Then there are the smells, because let's face it, no romance thrives without a certain tolerance. The hall isn't exactly perfumed with roses. People cover the scent with crushed lavender or rosemary, sometimes even burning juniper in course. You wake to the faint crackle of a fire, the smell of smoke and wet wool mixing in a way that's almost comforting. Outside, dawn fog curls along the moat, and the first rays of pale sunlight catch the silhouettes of servants scattering hay for the horses. You stretch, hearing the groan of old wooden beams above you, and remember where you are, or rather, when. The medieval world is humming to life again, and, honestly, it smells a little aggressive for morning romance. But that's exactly where today's story leads you. Into the fragrant or not so fragrant world of medieval hygiene, and the strange ways people tried to smell nice while catching someone's eye. You step through the narrow door into the courtyard, clutching your cloak against the chill. The air is sharp, heavy with that earthy mix of people, animals, and everything they leave behind. Bathing, in this age, isn't just inconvenient, it's suspicious. Many believe soaking in hot water opens the body to illness. So, people stick to wiping down with a damp cloth, perfuming their hands, and saying quiet prayers that nobody notices the layers of effort behind smelling decent. Historians still argue whether medieval folks were truly filthy or merely less perfumed than later centuries. Some records show nobles bathing monthly or more often if they were French. Others hint that peasants managed quick dips in rivers, though often for cooling off rather than cleansing. But one mainstream fact stands firm. Large public bathhouses used to exist in towns before the church eventually cracked down on them for being dens of sin. So yes, hygiene had its brief golden age before moral panic doused the soap. You follow a group of young noblewomen walking toward the great hall, each carrying small pouches tied to their belts. When one opens hers, you catch a blend of rosemary, sage, lavender, and something bitter, possibly vinegar. It's part deodorant, part warding charm. A sweet-smelling person, they thought, might literally repel evil spirits. Romantic and hygienic? That's a win. The women probably haven't bathed in days, but from this distance, you wouldn't know. There's a young man leaning near a wooden post, trying his best to look mysterious. His tunic shines faintly with oil, maybe olive if he's rich, animal fat if he's not. He dabs a bit of lemon peel on his wrists, glancing around to see who's watching. You wonder whether that's self-care or early cologne? Either way, it's bold, because citrus isn't cheap here. And for a second, you almost root for him trying hard, smelling like an orchard amid stables and smoke. You wander into the kitchen, where scent takes on an entirely new character. Onions, garlic, roasted venison, baked bread, and humanity itself form a perfume that could either attract or destroy romance depending on which end of the table you sit. Servants work fast, laughing as one tosses handfuls of dried thyme on the floor to freshen it. You think of medieval air fresheners rushes strewn across rooms, often mixed with mint or marjoram, and realize they were basically inventing potpourri, minus the Pinterest boards. Someone offers you a cup of wine diluted with water and flavored with cinnamon and honey. One sip, and your nose catches the faint sting of vinegar in it. Quirky tidbit. Vinegar wasn't just a cleaner. Some people dabbed it behind their ears as a perfume and plague deterrent. Maybe dating was easier if everyone shared the same scent profile, equal parts floral, smoky, and mildly pickled. You step outside, following a pair of squires heading for the well. They joke about bathing before the spring festival, and you can tell from their laughter that it's mostly bluff. Bathing was a communal act when it happened at all men and women, sometimes together, steam rising from wooden tubs, more talk than touching. The line between cleanliness and flirtation could blur fast, which is probably why church elders frowned upon it. Still, there's something tender about imagining two people meeting across a cloud of steam, finding a spark while scrubbing off half a year of dust. As the sun climbs higher, you notice the castle's top floors glow with warmth, while the lower chambers stay damp and dark. You duck into a small chamber where a lady's maid is heating water over a brazier. The lady herself sits wrapped in linen sheets while the maid dabs her neck with rosewater. "To keep the skin fair," the maid says proudly. You glance at the polished silver mirror nearby. It's not much more than reflective metal, but the woman studies her reflection carefully anyway. Looking good wasn't just vanity, it was politics. Beauty could attract an alliance, and cleanliness, or the illusion of it, could mean survival. You pause near a narrow window where the smell of rain mixes with chimney smoke. From here, you see the village below, tiny cottages with thatched roofs, people with patched clothes, faces lined with work. Down there, hygiene means rinsing at a stream, maybe rubbing with ash and lye if soap's too dear. And yet, peasants still braid flowers into their hair, still choose the cleanest cloak for Sunday Mass, still dream that someone might glance their way in the crowd. You almost admire their endurance. Imagine dating when both of you have dust in your hair, your hands rough from labor, and the faint perfume of goat about you. And yet, it happens. People laugh, flirt, even get married with smiles so bright it briefly outshines the grime. Love is stubborn that way. As you move back into the castle corridor, a priest passes by muttering about sin and vanity, clutching his cross tighter every time a whiff of perfume drifts past. Religious leaders often warned that sweet smells tempted the flesh. But, to be fair, that's what everyone's trying for temptation, in moderation. The irony is delicious. Incense poured during Mass was one of the sweetest smells around. Divine permission for a little fragrance after all. The day fades slowly to dusk again, the smoky air thickening into comfort. You notice couples lingering where torches flicker, whispering close enough that scent matters, even in this world of dirt and daring. You can almost hear one ask shyly, "Is that rosemary I smell?" And the other laughs softly, a sound that cuts through all the superstition and etiquette. You breathe in, and for a moment, even the smoke smells like nostalgia. Maybe the lesson here is that humanity has always tried to smell lovable even when the world itself was anything but. You smile at the thought, tuck your cloak closer, and listen to the fire crackle like a lullaby. You wake again to the sound of bells ringing from somewhere far beyond the castle walls. The sunlight pours weakly through stained glass, dappling motes of dust into reds and blues. You're sitting by a carved chest, running your hands over its intricate wooden patterns, the scent of cedar clinging to your fingers. Someone nearby is muttering about missing shoe buckles, lace, and thread. This morning, romance looks less like candlelit stairs and more like the frantic rustle of fabric. Welcome to the world of medieval fashion, where you're about to learn that dressing to impress meant weighing 10 pounds in linen and regret. Right now, you're staring at what might be called the medieval closet, though, really. It's just a wooden chest crammed with folds of wool, velvet, and silk. You watch as a young noblewoman debates between two gowns, one trimmed with imported ermine, the other embroidered in gold leaf. She sighs, gestures dramatically at the mirror, which is really just polished bronze, and mutters something about modesty. You resist the urge to tell her that a neckline that high could repel even the most determined knight. The air fills with tiny metallic clicks as servants lace corsets, thread sleeves, and straighten veils. You can feel the energy of it all, the nervous preparation, the desire to look flawless for the day's feast. Fashion here isn't just vanity, it's social architecture. The moment someone sees your outfit, they know exactly who you are, what you own, and whether you can afford warm bread with butter more than once a week. Historians still argue whether medieval clothes were truly uncomfortable or simply misunderstood by modern standards. Some suggest layered outfits helped regulate heat and hygiene. Others think it was all one grand, itchy performance of power. Either way, you feel like the average medieval evening came with equal measures of flair and overheating. You follow a group heading toward the Great Hall, each person a walking tapestry of color. The men wear doublets laced tight to show off the noble silhouette, broad shoulders, narrow waist. Some even pad their calves to appear stronger. One particularly ambitious young courtier adjusts his hat, which features what appears to be half a bird attached to it, a feathered disaster of confidence. You stifle a laugh and think, yes, that's commitment. Feathers weren't even the strangest accessory on display. One quirky tidbit passed among tailors tells of nobles who attached arm-length sleeves known as tippets that trailed behind them like banners of glory. And if that wasn't enough, platform shoes patents lifted the feet above dirt and puddles in town. Sounds clever until you imagine trying to flirt gracefully while clacking like a loose cartwheel. But don't underestimate the lower classes. Down in the village, things are less fancy and far more practical. You wander through the marketplace where a baker's daughter ties her apron tighter, smoothing creases with flour-covered hands. Her tunic's faded blue, but she's braided her hair with a sliver of ribbon, one small flourish of pride. In this world, that ribbon might be the difference between plain and pretty, between invisible and noticed. You catch her, catching someone's eye, a young blacksmith leaning on his stall, and suddenly you understand, style doesn't need velvet to matter. You make your way back toward the castle courtyard, steps sinking softly into straw. A group of knights passes, armor gleaming in the sunlight. Beneath all that armor, though, they're wearing padded linen doublets to absorb the weight, and possibly a few talismans stitched into their collars. Protection wasn't purely physical. Half the soldiers believed a saint's thread or lover's token could deflect a blade. That's medieval multitasking. Fashion, faith, and flirtation in one layered package. You pass a seamstress carefully working in her corner near the fire. Her nimble fingers stitch tiny pearls onto a crimson sleeve, eyes narrowing as she hums quietly. Every piece she makes could shift a reputation, even spark a romance. The lady favors red, she tells you knowingly, as though that single fact explains everything. Red meant wealth. It meant passion. It also meant you could afford the luxury of cochineal dye imported precious, nearly worth its weight in silver. Imagine expressing your love through pigment that took months to reach you by ship. Across the room, a small boy polishes a silver buckle while two squires discuss the latest court gossip. Someone's tunic was deemed too common, and the rumors circulate faster than the torches can flicker. You realize that fashion is its own battlefield. Every misplaced stitch or mismatched color could hint at arrogance or poverty. If you've ever stressed about wearing the wrong outfit to a party, you'd fit right in here. Later, you step outside the castle gates, walking past peddlers calling out their wares. One sells garlands of dried flowers for hair, another lays out finely woven belts. One particularly eccentric merchant waves a hat with two peaks. Yes, two designed for people undecided between humility and pride. You almost admire the creativity. Medieval fashion had range a balance of piety, vanity, and occasional madness. Above all, presentation mattered. The way cloth hung from your shoulders said as much about your reputation as your words did. Even peasants on festival days wore their best tunics and belts tight enough to show they cared. The church bells in the distance signal evening prayers, and as you watch the crowd kneeling under fading sunlight, something becomes clear. Fashion served not just beauty, but belonging. Still, love sneaks through the seams. You imagine a knight sending his beloved a glove embroidered with tiny silver thread, or a woman secretly weaving her admirer's initials into the hem of her gown, a private rebellion sewn into public fabric. One popular legend even tells of a nobleman who wore his lover's sleeve tied around his arm during a tournament, a silent declaration read by everyone and acknowledged by none. That's boldness disguised as clothing etiquette. You smile, feeling the absurd warmth of shared humanity stretching across centuries. The same impulse that drives you to choose the right shirt before a date once drove them to lace bodices tight and balance peacock feathers on hats. People might age, customs might fade, but the need to be seen to be admired stays stubborn as ever. Night comes gently, cool and soft after all the day's brightness. The torches are lit, shadows wiggle across walls, and you can almost hear the distant laughter of nobles spinning through a dance. Their gowns whisper against the floor, satin gliding like wind across stone. You lean back against the wall, eyes half closed, and think, even beneath all the itchy layers and heavy meaning, they're still just people trying to impress someone. Time changes the fabric, not the feeling. You're standing in the great hall again, but the noise has changed. The clang of armor and the rustle of gowns have softened into something slower music and murmurs drifting like smoke. You tilt your head, catching phrases wrapped in rhymed language, and realize the people here aren't talking about taxes or tournaments. They're talking about love, though not the kind you'd swipe for. This is courtly love, part poetry, part performance, part impossibly tragic emotional endurance test. A knight across from you whispers to a lady seated beyond his reach. His eyes flicker to her just long enough to count as daring, but not long enough to commit sin. She lowers her gaze, fans herself even though the room is freezing, and pretends not to notice. This is Flirting Medieval Edition, a moral obstacle course where touching her hand could start a war. Courtly love, as you'll soon learn, is the medieval version of liking someone but not being allowed to actually like them. It was love raised to art form and agony. Noble men were meant to worship their ladies from afar, writing ballads, carrying kerchiefs, and sighing dramatically from windowsills. Historians still argue whether anyone actually enjoyed it, or if everyone was just cosplaying restraint for reputation's sake. But the evidence, the letters, the songs, the carvings on chapel benches suggest some people took it seriously. Maybe painfully so. You step forward, drawn by a lute's melody. The minstrel on the dais is singing of a lady pure as sunlight and a knight loyal unto death. Everyone sways to the rhythm, eyes half closed. You half expect a slow clap at the end. But no, this isn't performance. It's education. These songs teach nobles how to feel properly, how to suffer beautifully. Because somehow, desire here is supposed to be more romantic if it's impossible. Nothing says devotion like lifelong frustration wrapped in verse. You hear fragments of a conversation near the dais. The truest love, one says, exists without reward. Another sighs as though that's a compliment. You quickly realize that actual affection is considered too easy. The idea is to keep longing alive, a constant ache that sharpens one's virtue. A noble heart must burn, but quietly. That's the goal. Love that never dissolves into reality. A strange thought crosses your mind. Maybe this was their version of emotional minimalism. No messy entanglements, just letters and poems passed between courtyards, hearts breaking politely. It's all very poetic until you imagine trying to confess your feelings via scroll carrier while both your families are actively negotiating dowries with other people. You wander into the castle garden where the air smells of rosewood and rain. The hedges hide more whispers, young courtiers trading glances beside fountains shaped like mythic beasts. One plucks a flower and breaks it in half before handing it to another. That single gesture says everything: longing, secrecy, and impending heartbreak. There's a thrill to it, the way gentle rules make rebellion more tempting. A robin lands nearby, cocking its head as though judging everyone for overcomplicating simple attraction. Maybe it's right. You can't help but smile these people could turn mild curiosity into a 4-act tragedy if you let them. Still, there's charm in their restraint. You picture the moment a knight returns from battle, armor dented, posture straight, pretending the ribbon on his wrist means nothing to anyone but him. The lady watching from the parapet pretends, too, until he bows, briefly, and her breath catches. Nobody needs to explain it. They have their own code, one that even silence can speak fluently. Among scholars, you overhear the claim that courtly love refined men's manners. Maybe. Or maybe it was just medieval HR training disguised as poetry. Still, it gave the age its rhythm an elegant way to channel desire into art. One quirky tidbit says knights sometimes practiced love service, dedicating heroic deeds to ladies they barely knew. Imagine doing that for your crush today, posting, "This skyscraper climb goes out to Jenny from accounting." You keep walking through ivy-covered corridors where candlelight dances across carvings. One shows a lady dropping her handkerchief while a knight kneels to return it, a subtle nod to classic power play. Games, you think, romantic theater. And yet, behind every scripted gesture pulses something real, the need to be seen, to make meaning out of emotion, to turn chaos into structure. You step into a smaller chamber where a group recites from a book. Turns out, it's The Art of Courtly Love by Andreas Capellanus, a medieval bestseller of sorts. It lists the rules of love in numbered form, because naturally, even heartbreak needed bureaucracy. Somewhere around Rule 9, you stifle a laugh. It says, "No one can love two people at the same time." Tell that to the royal courts of Europe. Outside, the sky bruises into twilight. Torches glow against the stone, and laughter ripples through the gardens. Someone has started a game of verses where each person must invent a love line on the spot. "Your eyes," one knight stammers, "sparkle brighter than St. Elmo's fire." The lady chuckles, unimpressed, and retorts, "St. Elmo's fire only appears in storms." Romantic burn, achieved. There's a comfort in watching them stumble, proof that romance has always been awkward. You feel it in the lingering pauses, in the shaky compliments, in the tension just under civility's surface. These people may wear crowns, but at heart they're still nervous teenagers afraid of saying too much. As you linger by the fountain, the night deepens, the air cooling into stillness. Somewhere inside, a bard's voice rises again, softer this time. Love that suffers in silence is the truest flame. You roll your eyes, but also, maybe, understand. Courtly love wasn't about logic, it was about giving form to loneliness. You close your eyes, letting the melody hum through you, and for a fleeting moment, you feel their yearning muted, fragile, but sincere. Maybe love like this wasn't meant to be achieved at all. Maybe it was meant to be dreamed about forever. The morning light slips through high castle windows, catching in dust motes that linger like sleepy confetti. You stretch, shake off last night's dreamy poetry recital, and wander toward the bustle of the main courtyard again. Today feels different, less sentimental, more transactional. Because now you're entering the marketplace of love, where marriages are forged not by hearts, but by ledgers. Welcome to the economy of romance, a world where dating is really just negotiation with better costumes. Down by the open gates, you find yourself among the hum of scribes, heralds, and servants carrying scrolls thicker than your arm. Marriage here begins with handwriting, not heartbeats. You peer over a clerk's shoulder to see elegant Latin spilling across the parchment, a draft contract binding two noble families in perpetua amicitia, eternal friendship. Translation, your sheep, my vineyards, everyone profits. It's a mood. Still, there's something theatrical about it all. Two fathers stand under an archway arguing politely over the size of a dowry, while their children, barely teenagers, shift nervously nearby, stealing glances at the ground. The daughters are dressed like saints in portraits. The sons pretend they're comfortable in starched collars. You can almost hear your modern brain whisper, "This is a group project with lifelong consequences." Historians still argue whether romance truly fit into these alliances, or if affection simply developed later, by luck or tolerance. But one mainstream fact holds steady: marriage in much of medieval Europe was primarily a family affair, often brokered by matchmakers who could recite bloodlines the way you might list your contacts. Love matches, when they happened, were whispered about like miracles or mistakes. You follow one such matchmaker through the bustling square. She's short, shrewd-eyed, and armed with gossip sharper than any blade. Lady Margot seeks a husband, she tells a merchant. Must own property near church, no debts, no limp. The merchant nods gravely, as if discussing horse breeds. Within days, that same Lady Margot might be introduced to 3 candidates, exchanged like diplomatic letters. If sparks fly, great. If not, no one cares. As long as land is gained, titles secured, and sons produced. You slip into a nearby chapel where a young couple whispers behind a column. They are smiling, anxious, secretive, probably hoping their match doesn't reach the wrong years. Forbidden affection could derail powerful arrangements, and rules were ironclad. Still, people found ways around them. Hidden notes tucked into hymnals, chance meetings at blessings, prayers delivered with suspicious passion. The irony drips as heavily as the candle wax. The same church that controlled marriage ceremonies also inadvertently hosted half the covert courtships in Christendom. You travel a little further to the manor kitchens, where a different kind of matchmaking happens altogether. The cook is gossiping over turnips. The lord's daughter's to marry the baron's second son. Poor girl's barely seen him. Imagine sharing a table before a kiss. You realize that most peasants never met nobles except through stories, and probably thought them mad for marrying strangers in silk, while real love blossomed over breadlines and harvest gatherings. Still, class didn't entirely spare anyone from anxiety. Upstairs, a noblewoman paces her chamber surrounded by bolts of fabric and gold-threaded veils. She's about to be betrothed, and though her face is calm, her hands twist nervously in her lap. This union could reshape her family's fortune or doom them. You think of modern prenups and laugh quietly to yourself, different language, same panic. One quirky footnote about all this: in some regions, informal hand-fasting ceremonies let couples promise themselves to each other without priests, just witnesses and clasped hands. Later, the church tried to regulate that away, calling it sinful, but for years people kept doing it regardless. No contracts, no dowries, just two people deciding together. For a fleeting window of history, romance had an unchaperoned loophole. A sudden commotion draws your attention outside, a messenger galloping in, cloak flapping like a banner. He dismounts and kneels before the local lord, handing over a scroll bound in ribbon. The seal cracks. The lord reads in silence, then smiles faintly. A son's been promised to the daughter of de Montfort, he declares. Cheers rise. There's a feast tonight. You realize you've just witnessed the medieval version of an engagement announcement, minus the Instagram post, but with equal amounts of performance. You glance around the yard, where preparations begin immediately. Servants hang colorful pennants, musicians tune lutes, and cooks attack geese with alarming efficiency. The soon-to-be couple stands side by side, awkward smiles frozen in place. They exchange a bow more than a glance, it's politeness, not passion. Still, behind their nervous eyes, you sense curiosity, maybe quiet admiration. Many matches, after all, blossomed into affection with time. Sharing meals, surviving winters, raising children, it built bonds the poets didn't bother to describe. Love sometimes arrived late, but rooted deep. Scholars might debate its purity, but you suspect it felt real when two people finally learned to laugh after the bells stopped ringing. As evening falls, you take a seat near the feast's edge, sipping mead that tastes faintly of honey and smoke. The hall glows with dancing light. Everyone's trying to look pleased. You overhear someone joke that dowries are the price of peace and perfume. Another laughs so hard wine splashes across the table. You can't help smiling. Humor remains the pressure valve of every era. Later, once the formalities fade and the noise settles into gentle chatter, you catch a fleeting scene, the newly betrothed couple whispering at the foot of a staircase. She laughs quietly at something he says. He looks stunned, then grins. It's small, but real, like warmth cracking through frost. You step away, letting them be, realizing that even within arranged expectations, people still found their way toward tenderness. Above, the minstrels play one last tune, a lilting melody about fortune and fate. You close your eyes, listening as the lyrics drift something about hearts finding their measure, even when bound by gold. Maybe that's humanity's best trick. Sneaking love into the spaces duty leaves behind. You wake again to the hum of footsteps on polished stone and the whisper of heavy skirts skimming the floor. Morning light filters through tall windows, and in its golden haze, you realize today feels tight, cautious, supervised. You're stepping into the polite tension of chaperoned romance, the only kind most respectable people were allowed. Here, every glance has an audience, and every smile comes with a witness. You follow the sound of footsteps to the garden court, where benches are arranged beneath arches of ivy. Two young nobles stroll slowly along the path, maintaining the exact distance required to preserve virtue and dignity. Between them walks a third person older, gray-faced, and armed with the unblinking gaze of a hawk. This is the chaperone, part bodyguard, part moral law enforcement. Their entire purpose is to ensure that love, if it happens at all, does so with suitable restraint. It's a strange triangle to witness. The young man leans forward to ask the lady about her embroidery, voice low and careful, while the chaperone clears her throat loudly enough to send birds scattering. The poor girl straightens instantly, replying with rehearsed modesty about weather, not feelings. You can almost hear both of them silently screaming into their fancy collars. In this world, most meetings between the sexes happen in public or structured settings, feasts, hunts, pilgrimages, and almost never alone. A single unsupervised moment could destroy reputations, families, entire political alliances. Historians still argue whether these strict codes came from pure morality or simply from the upper class's obsession with control. Either way, the chances of spontaneous romance were about as high as bathing twice a week. But let's be fair, people always find loopholes. Some chaperones could be bribed or distracted. You've heard stories about accidental separations during falconry hunts or conveniently extended dance reels during banquets. One quirky tidbit survives from medieval accounts of tournaments. Noble ladies sometimes dropped favor tokens from balconies with perfectly innocent aim, and knights who retrieved them often lingered for entirely non-athletic conversation afterward. You walk through a passageway leading to the solar, where noble women sit sewing. A young knight stands near the door, pretending to discuss wool imports, while sneaking glances toward a particular seat by the window. The lady there, his rumored interest, pretends to be engrossed in her needlework. Between them sits, of course, an older aunt who might as well be carved from granite. Her head turns every time he shifts his weight. This dance of discretion would test even your patience, yet somehow it thrills them. The closer the risk, the sweeter the moment. Speak softly, warns the aunt. The walls have ears. And you believe her behind tapestries often lurk servants and gossipers. Privacy is luxury. Rumor is currency. Still, when she turns to adjust her shawl, the knight flicks his fingers toward the lady's embroidery hoop. She glances down and sees a tiny dried sprig tucked beneath it, a symbol of devotion hidden in plain sight. She hides her smile fast. The aunt suspects nothing. Small victories count. In the great hall, benches slide as people gather for lunch. The atmosphere loosens slightly, the chaperones still hover, but there's chatter now, and laughter. You sit near a pair of cousins whose task, apparently, is to graciously observe a would-be courtship. The young man at the table's end tries to impress by describing his jousting performance, while the lady opposite lowers her lashes modestly. Her guardians whisper back and forth about his family's estate size like sports commentators reviewing stats. You try not to laugh into your goblet. Historically, these chaperone settings weren't just social niceties, they acted as background checks with ambiance. Nobody risked affection without knowing every cousin, crop yield, and rumored debt attached to the other. Love might spark anywhere, but marriage approval lived or died by reputation management. Even servants joined in this invisible network of surveillance, reporting innocent strolls to lords and ladies faster than medieval mail could travel. As the meal ends, one of the chaperone's gray hair perfectly coiled, patience long gone, finally nods, granting the lady permission to walk the courtyard for air. You follow, amused, as both participants nearly trip in their rush to reach the gardens. Still, the distance rule holds. A hand's width apart, eyes front, words chosen with surgical care. "Are you enjoying the festivities?" he asks. "Yes," she answers, tone rehearsed, "though I do miss finer music." "That could be arranged." Another cough from the shadows. The chaperone, apparently reborn from thin air, stands arms crossed, face unimpressed. You suspect medieval love had a stronger imagination than modern rom-coms, mainly because anyone with less subtlety ended up exiled to a convent. You wander further into the stable yard, where things feel freer. The lower ranks flirt more openly, laughter carrying over the smell of hay. Here, no one looks for chaperones because everyone's too busy surviving to pretend innocence. You can see why some nobles longed for that plain honesty, love without spectators, affection without choreography. Still, for those trapped in castles of etiquette, rebellion often came disguised as ritual. One story tells of lovers meeting under guise of confession, letting the walls of the church shield their whispers. Another, less saintly, describes couples exchanging coded messages inside psalters, marking prayers at matching verses so when one flips the pages, they'll find silent proof of connection. You can almost imagine the rush of seeing that hidden mark, a simple smudge of ink, meaning, I am here. Evening looms again, painting the corridors in amber. Music swells faintly from the far end of the hall. Dinners in this place stretch late into night, filled with watching more than speaking. The couple from earlier sits together again, still accompanied by their human shadow, but this time, there's a rhythm between them. Each shared glance feels like a quiet conspiracy, an act of stubborn hope. As torches flicker lower, you realize something touching about all this constraint. The more you limit love, the more creative it becomes. Every sigh, every accidental brush of sleeves, every candle passed down the table grows electric with meaning. The chaperone may guard the space, but the imagination belongs entirely to the lovers. You slip quietly through the door as laughter fades behind you, the cool night air sweeping across your face. Maybe it wasn't freedom, but it was its own kind of romance, all the same. The morning breaks with a mutter of voices beneath your window scrolls passing from one hand to another, hooves clattering somewhere on the cobblestones. You peek out and find a boy in a faded cap sprinting from the castle gates, clutching a folded parchment sealed with wax. Someone above tosses him a few coins, and off he goes down the hill. Letters, precious and dangerous, are already flying through the air. You stretch, smiling knowingly. Ah, the secret lifeblood of medieval romance. You wander down a staircase still cool with night air, the smell of beeswax and parchment in every corner. The scribes' quarters bustle with quiet panic. They're the unseen messengers of half the love stories you've been tripping through. Sitting among them is a young monk, quill moving steadily as he copies what's clearly no prayer text. You glance over and read just enough Latin to realize it's a verse about the ache of distance and the burning heart. The monk notices your knowing look. Poems for confession, he says with the flattest of tones, which somehow makes you want to laugh. Secret communication is risky here. If a letter's intercepted, scandal bursts like a torch dropped in hay. Still, lovers write anyway, trusting luck or loyal servants to deliver their hearts disguised as scripture or accounting notes. You pick up one example, ink faded, edges frayed, but words still pulsing. It reads something like, every dawn feels colder than your absence. The signature? Just an initial, because courage here isn't loud, it's coded. Historians still argue whether most medieval letters were truly romantic or just formal gestures of gratitude dressed in florid phrasing. But even the dry ones tremble with implication. When someone writes, "May God keep you ever in grace," they might mean, "I miss you desperately," or "Please meet me by the well at midnight." Context is everything. You leave the scribes behind and step out into the sunlight that warms the courtyard stones. There, near the well, two women are talking, one holding what appears to be a small linen pouch. Inside, you notice, is a ring. "A favor from her lord," the older one whispers. It's simple iron, but tucked beneath it is a lock of hair, his, apparently. The lady giggles when she sees it, cheeks flushed like someone caught stealing sweetness from the pantry. These little symbols carried weight far beyond their small form. A glove, a ribbon, a brooch, each could speak louder than words permitted. You pass knights tightening belts before a hunt, each displaying something incongruously delicate among their armor: a girdle, a handkerchief, a charm. One eccentric even wears an embroidered shoelace around his wrist. You raise an eyebrow, but then again, love makes people commit to bold-fashioned choices in every century. Later, you trail behind a group of servants carrying trays toward the library. The corridor ahead is dim, lined with carvings of saints who appear to be watching a bit too closely. There, behind a heavy door, you find her the same noblewoman from before, sitting under stained glass light, pretending to read a volume of sermons. Her fingers trace the pages slowly, but her eyes flick constantly to the door. When it creaks open, a folded parchment slips through the gap. She catches it midair so deftly it must not be her first time. She breaks the seal with trembling hands. You turn away politely, or pretend to, giving her privacy even though curiosity claws at you. Still, you catch a whisper from her lips. Tonight, near the East Tower. Her smile, faint but real, carries more relief than joy, because every note like this is a miracle of survival. You exhale softly, half terrified for her, half rooting for her rebellious streak. Secret meetings, of course, risk everything. Lovers sometimes left trails of clues, ribbons on window lattices, candles in particular patterns, the faint scratch of initials carved behind staircases. You find one such etching as you wander 2 letters entwined beneath a faded coat of arms. They've survived centuries of rain and echo, stubborn proof that even under scrutiny, affection leaves its mark. You pause near the outer wall where the torches burn low. Beyond it, the fields stretch pale under mist. Here, couples sometimes met, away from the wards of servants and suspicion. The thrill of those stolen hours must have been intoxicating. You imagine the scene, breath visible in the cold, hearts pounding under layers of wool, the rustle of leaves hiding the sound of laughter. Each minute borrowed, each risk enormous. Affection was a gamble with consequences ranging from marriage to exile, or worse, a forced vow of penance in some dreary convent. One quirky tidbit makes you chuckle. In a few regions, sunset signals were designed for such rendezvous. Certain church bells meant to announce curfew also became love bells, marking the time when respectable folk went home and daring lovers crept out. You can almost hear one now, solemn, slow, and scandalous in its unintended rhythm. But for all the secrecy, there's sincerity underneath. You find an old tapestry half-finished, depicting a woman handing a falcon to a knight. In medieval symbolism, that bird often stood for fidelity trained, loyal, and patient. It never strays for long. You smile at the metaphor. 2 people kept apart by rules, yet circling each other endlessly through letters, glances, gestures. As dusk bleeds into violet and the torches flicker awake, the lady from earlier reappears in the courtyard wrapped in her cloak. She moves quickly, cautious, but not fearful. You follow at a respectful distance to where the East Tower shadow touches the garden wall. A man waits there, motionless, except for his breath fogging in the air. No dramatic declarations, no trembling music. Just 2 people standing close enough that their silhouettes merge. They don't speak. They don't need to. All day's pretending has led here to quiet honesty. You step back, letting them fade into the folds of shadow. For every grand story written by nobles or poets, hundreds like this one played out in silence, erased by propriety, yet aching to exist. Maybe that's what makes medieval romance strangely modern. It's about saying the unsayable, finding softness in a world that demands armor. The moon climbs higher, turning everything silver and secret again. Somewhere behind you, a night guard coughs, and the couple breaks apart instantly, retreating into darkness. You watch their paths separate, one toward the chapel's safety, the other toward the stables, and feel the air settle once more, thick with the scent of wax, stone, and sighs. You rise to the sound of roosters, distant hammers, and chatter that feels rougher, louder, and a lot more alive. Gone are the echoing marble halls of nobles and the careful choreography of candlelight flirtations. You've wandered far from the castle this morning down the winding hill, over uneven cobblestones, and into the heart of a village. Here, romance doesn't wear perfume or silk. It smells like bread, sweat, and morning ale. Welcome to love among the common folk, messier, warmer, and somehow more honest. You pass a row of timber cottages, their thatched roofs leaning toward each other like gossiping neighbors. Smoke rises from chimneys. At one doorway, a woman kneels, scrubbing laundry in a wooden basin. She pauses, shading her eyes to greet a man hauling fresh water from the well. Their brief exchange is simple, a nod, a grin, but it lingers a fraction too long to be casual. No chaperones here, no need for coded letters or gilded phrases, just two people surviving together, finding small joys between chores. For peasants and tradesfolk, dating doesn't really exist, but affection, companionship, and quiet desire certainly do. The baker's apprentice flirts by slipping an extra bun into the miller's daughter's basket. The blacksmith hammers nails louder when she walks by showing off, you realize. Romance here is practical, folded right into labor. You can almost taste the difference. Less ceremony, more sincerity. Down at the riverbank, young men gather to repair fishing nets while women rinse clothes and trade jokes. One tosses a splash of water, another retaliates a flirt war disguised as laundry. You sit nearby, pretending to inspect the rippling surface while learning more about medieval flirtation than any noble poet could teach you. Laughter echoes through the valley. Someone plays a flute, off-key but earnest, as if announcing that life, despite hardship, demands celebration anyway. Historians still argue whether the lower classes truly enjoyed more romantic freedom or just less surveillance. Some suggest they married for affection simply because property concerns mattered less. Others claim family elders still negotiated unions only on smaller scales of sheep, tools, or ale barrels. The truth seems somewhere between. Love balanced on the seesaw of duty and desire, even without castles involved. A local elder notices you watching and grins. Love? He mutters, half a question, half a scoff. A full belly first, then hearts. And yet, he winks, nodding toward a young couple seated on the grass, heads dangerously close together. He's seen enough life to know affection always sneaks in, no matter what the world demands first. You wander to the market square, where things smell gloriously chaotic. Meat roasting on spits, ale sloshing, wet straw underfoot. A drummer beats a quick rhythm as villagers begin to dance in a rough circle. Partners switch with laughter and improvise spins. Hands find hands not for politeness, but because not holding them would be unthinkable. You feel the air buzz with something that isn't formality or status, it's permission. For an hour, for a song, they're all equals. And there's humor here, too. A tailor shouts compliments from across the square, something about a girl's new skirt being fit for St. Mary's feast. She throws him a look that says, quite clearly, try harder. You grin. Realizing that flirtation hasn't evolved much in 800 years, it's still an awkward performance of hope disguised as confidence. A quirky tidbit reaches your ear from a merchant's chatter. Among some villages, special love tokens weren't jewels or letters, but everyday tools exchanged as symbols. A well-carved spoon might mean affection, a wooden ring, quiet promise. One particular custom from parts of Northern Europe involved a man carving an intricately patterned chest for his intended the hope chest, where she'd store her belongings until their wedding. If she accepted it, love was literal carpentry. That's commitment, measured in splinters. As afternoon sets in, you duck into a small tavern, the kind that smells of smoke, laughter, and fermented apples. Inside, benches creak under the weight of workers shaking off the day. Two friends argue cheerfully about whether a farmer's daughter has bewitched a shepherd across the field. He's gone soft, one jeers. He drops tools whenever she walks by. The other laughs. That's not witchcraft, that's springtime. The whole room roars. You sip warm cider, Watching this theater of love, the casual teasing, the boldness of proximity. No letters, no chaperones, no permission slips. Just the raw pulse of being human, allowed to show it. Outside, twilight glows on thatched roofs. You find a small clearing beyond the cottages where villagers gather around a bonfire. The flames dance bright as faces light up in their warmth. Someone begins a folk song, the kind that travels by memory. Not manuscripted tune about two lovers separated by seasons, but reunited at harvest. Voices join one by one, imperfect but harmonious. There's something pure in it, unweighted by class or decorum. Romance, here, belongs to the rhythm of survival. You glance around and notice the couple from earlier, the laundry flirtation duo seated together by the fire now, closer this time. Their hands rest side by side in the grass, fingers brushing every few lines of the song. It's simple, fleeting, and infinitely more intimate than any feast hall recitation. You silently root for them, these two quiet rebels crafting affection between exhaustion and duty. Above them, the night hums with insects, the river whispering nearby. It feels less like a story about the past and more like a universal heartbeat, steady, patient, stubbornly hopeful. Even in mud and chaos, people carve space for beauty. That's the secret the cleaner halls rarely tell. Love doesn't belong just to nobles and poets. It thrives in bread ovens, barn corners, and borrowed songs. When you stand to leave, the sky has already shifted to deep indigo. Sparks rise from the fire, drifting like tiny stars. A dog curls beside your feet, sighing softly. You smile, knowing that tomorrow, gossip will spread, fields will need tending, and chores will resume. But somewhere between shovels and song, another story will begin. You step quietly down the lantern-lit path, letting the warmth fade behind you, feeling newly convinced that love, no matter when or where, isn't elegant or strategic. It's a reflex. It's survival in disguise. The next morning brings a hush over the castle and valley alike, a quiet hum of anticipation before the day's ceremonies begin. You follow the smell of ink and beeswax to a small side chamber where servants are arranging trays filled not with food, but with trinkets, gleaming rings, silk ribbons, and finely embroidered gloves. At first, it looks like the storage room of a wealthy merchant, but then you realize this is where emotions get traded. Today, you're learning the secret dialect of gifts the language lovers used when they couldn't speak aloud. You step closer to the table, catching glints of meaning in every object. A single glove? That meant fidelity. A silver ring? Eternal devotion? Or sometimes a quiet promise without priestly approval. An apple polished until it shined like gold? That one could mean temptation or affection depending on how it was offered. You wonder how many misunderstandings bloomed from misplaced fruit. You watch as messengers scurry in and out carrying these tokens wrapped in linen or tied with colored thread. In a time when open affection could spark scandal, gifts were safer than words. They didn't blush, they didn't gossip. And if caught, a person could always feign innocence. A gift, they might say? Why, that's simply courtesy. You can imagine the sly smiles behind those excuses. A young tailor enters, arms full of cloth, and begins dressing a dummy in a half-finished gown while humming to himself. The scraps on his workbench tell a story pieces of ribbon dyed in deep red loops of gold braid, even a small square of soft blue velvet. For the Baron's daughter, he mutters. She sends it to her knight. The fabric glows in the lamplight, and you realize that color itself was communication. Red signaled passion, blue, loyalty. Green, newly sparked love or jealousy, depending on who you asked. Historians still argue whether these meanings came from poetry or local fashion gossip. Either way, the code ran deep. Outside, court heralds bustle like ants arranging banners for a midday festival. Every pennant, every embroidered crest has been chosen with precision. But your attention drifts toward a nobleman pacing near the well, clutching something small in his hand. You edge closer and catch a glimpse of a tiny carved brooch shaped like a falcon. He flips it over nervously, then presses it into the palm of a servant. "Deliver this," he whispers, "to the lady in the north garden." The servant bows and melts away into the crowd. You follow at a distance as the token makes its journey, crossing courtyards and corridors until it reaches its destination, a lady draped in pale silk, surrounded by 3 companions. When the brooch is presented, she barely glances down just enough to read its shape, then back up with the faintest, most unreadable smile. "You may tell your master," she says softly, "that the hawk must await fair weather." Translation: not yet, but perhaps soon. It's poetry as diplomacy dressed as flirtation, and your heart can't decide whether to laugh or sigh. You think about how unnecessary words can be in a world this watchful. A gifted glove, a shared flower, a color of thread, each carries danger disguised as decoration. And yet, the human need to communicate affection refuses to surrender. Even under surveillance, people found a way to say, "I see you." A quirky tidbit floats back from something you read once. In some courts, gifting a mirror was scandalous. It implied obsession or vanity. Wine served as apology. Salt symbolized trust. And exchanging belts or girdles could mean bound to thee, a gesture both romantic and mildly suggestive. You picture someone nervously handing over such a gift and having to explain it to their lady's stern aunt. "Oh, this old belt? Purely symbolic." Right. You wander next toward the artisan quarter just outside the castle walls. Here, commoners carry the same customs but with simpler tokens. Carved wooden rings, iron pins, even pieces of baked clay shaped into hearts long before Valentine's Day existed. You notice a young mason carefully engraving initials into a pebble, laughing at himself as he works. "Not much," he says when you ask, "but she'll know it's from me." The sentiment outweighs the splendor. As the afternoon stretches, the castle hums with music again. Guests prepare for a small tournament, a display of honorable skill. You take a seat on a low wall, watching armored figures line up beneath fluttering banners. Among them, you spot the knight from before the one whose hawk brooch now rests with the lady in silk. On his sleeve, you notice a strip of blue fabric secured with gold thread. Her reply? Perhaps? The crowd cheers as the competitors ready their lances, but what stirs the air isn't just chivalry, it's showmanship. Jousting becomes a love letter in motion. He rides forward. The lady watches. When his lance strikes true and shatters, applause bursts out. But his eyes go only to her stand, seeking some small response. She presses a hand to her heart for just half a breath, hidden beneath her veil. To anyone else, meaningless. To him, everything. As the day wanes, the crowd disperses, and you catch the aftermath: laughter, spilled ale, gossip trailing like confetti. Servants gather discarded flowers and ribbons, each now stripped of context but still carrying faint perfume. In the quiet, you find one ribbon caught on a branch, fluttering like a whisper left behind. You imagine all the secrets woven into it: hesitations, hopes, half-finished confessions. Night creeps in, soft and heavy. The torches glow amber against cold stone, throwing long, slow-moving shadows. Somewhere above, music continues faintly, a harp, perhaps, playing a melody you don't recognize but feel down to your bones. It's the echo of so many silent exchanges, the soundtrack of people who found ways to love in a world that told them not to. You glance again at the fluttering ribbon before turning away, and for a fleeting second, you think of everything love has been forced to become just to survive. Words sealed, feelings disguised, hearts stuffed into trinkets tiny enough to hide. But somehow, it still shines through. Because gift or glance, language or silence, humanity always finds its voice. You wake to music and movement, the air alive with the smell of roasted meat and sweet honey. The village below is bursting into color, smoke curling over tents and canvas stalls. It's festival day, a pocket of chaos and joy in the long, obedient calendar of medieval life. You step into sunlight and blink, momentarily blinded by banners snapping in the wind. Today is not about duty. Today is a rare chance for laughter, song, and if you're daring flirting without fear of confession or consequence, you stroll through the crowd, every sense on overload. Spilled cider steams in the dirt. Children weave between legs, clutching paper windmills. Somewhere, a fiddler scrapes an exuberant tune that sounds like someone bottled laughter and turned it into melody. You find yourself tapping your foot to it almost unconsciously. Already, couples dance, hands clasped, skirts swishing, boots stamping earth to rhythm. Never mind that half of them probably have arranged marriages waiting. For one afternoon, it feels like freedom. Historians still argue whether common festivals offered real social mingling between classes or if nobles merely watched from platforms above it all. The truth, you suspect, lives somewhere in between. For the peasants, festivals were rare windows to court openly. For nobles, they were spectacle-controlled chaos dressed as charity. Still, both sides came searching, the thrill of seeing and being seen. You wander past the blacksmith's booth where his daughters are hawking charms guaranteed to win affection. They hold up small pewter hearts strung on twine, winking at boys pretending not to stare back. Nearby, a brewer ladles ale for an eager line of men who claim they're just thirsty, but you notice their gazes fixed on the same girl carrying trays of sweet rolls. Maybe love begins here, and excuses about bread. Someone presses a flower crown into your hands, a perfumed tangle of clover and daisies, and points toward the dancing circle. You can't watch forever, she says with a smirk. You're swept closer by the crowd. The music quickens, laughter thickens, and the scent of hay and bodies fills the air. With every spin, new faces flash around you, bright-eyed, flushed with sun and sugar. It's easy to see why festivals spawn so many romances. For a few hours, no contracts, no chaperones, no expectations, just genuine chance. But even here, rules sneak in through the back door. Proper ladies must pretend reluctance to dance. Proper men must bow first. Married folks can join so long as they look bored. The rest, young, hopeful, reckless, make their own etiquette as the music carries them. You pause near the edge of the square where a jester juggles apples. He tosses one high, then winks at a girl in the crowd before catching it behind his back. A splash of laughter that follows feels brighter than sunlight. A wild detail you once read drifts through your memory. During such festivals, even jesters sometimes slipped coded jokes meant for specific people. A single rhyme about rosy cheeks could double as a proposal. Shakespearean long before Shakespeare existed. The air thickens with the smell of roasted boar and freshly baked pies. You realize that while noble feasts celebrated order, festivals were about glorious mess, half-drunken toasts, games that always ended in mud, and flirtation carried by scent and rhythm. You spot a ring toss game nearby where girls toss garlands over standing posts or occasionally over the heads of boys they fancy. One bold toss misses entirely, landing on a baker's hat instead. His startled laughter gives him away, and suddenly they're talking. You smirk Cupid's arrow clearly has a sense of humor and terrible aim. As the afternoon peaks, someone shouts about a mock tournament beginning by the field. You follow the stream of villagers until you reach a roped-off circle. Two young men step forward with wooden staves, performing a clumsy parody of chivalric combat. The prize announced, a kiss from the queen of the festival, a title awarded to the loudest singer earlier. She's still red-faced from it, standing with folded arms as the crowd chants encouragement. When the fighters tumble into the dirt, laughing, she rolls her eyes but kisses one anyway to the crowd's applause. Flattery may be cheap, but charm still costs courage. At the far end, merchants spread their wares, ribbons, combs, sweets, even painted tokens said to attract luck and love. One particularly eccentric seller claims his roses were dipped in moonlight. Buy one for your beloved, he insists, and she'll dream of you tonight. You raise an eyebrow, but pocket a coin anyway. Romance, even fabricated, sells. As the sun dips low, lanterns flicker to life, smoke carrying the faint tang of charred sugar. The crowd shifts. Vials and pipes take over the melody, slower now, softer. Here, standing under fading light, you notice real tenderness stir again. Couples drift to the edge of the fairgrounds, where shadows stretch long and forgiving. A girl offers her hand to a boy, laughter fading to something quieter. A middle-aged pair, gray hair glinting like silver thread, sway off-key to the tune. Love, it seems, doesn't care about timing or class. It shows up wherever music dares to play. One quirky festival tradition you overhear from an old woman makes you chuckle. Midnight apple diving. Girls drop apple peels into water while whispering names. The way it floats supposedly reveals whom they'll marry. Her hand trembles slightly as she demonstrates, grinning with toothless pride. You imagine centuries of hopeful hearts watching apple skins drift, half magic, half desperation. Night swells deeper. Fires glow golden through the mist. The dancing fades into murmured stories and shared benches. Someone next to you yawns, leaning against a friend's shoulder. You feel the exhaustion of joy settling like a warm blanket. The entire village exhales together, a single body spent on laughter and light. And in that quiet, you think of what love looks like stripped of armor and silk. It's not letters sealed in wax or alliances drawn on parchment. It's flour on cheeks, music broken by giggles, hands finding each other because they simply want to. The festival will end. Reality will return. But the memory, the heartbeat of that one shared dance will echo long after. The last fiddle note hangs suspended in cool air, trembling between stars and silence. You close your eyes, and for a moment, everything blurs into the warmth of torches and the sound of someone's hand brushing yours. When you wake again, music still lingers faintly in your ears, but it's softer now, polished, reframed. The rough laughter of the village has been replaced with harp strings echoing down vaulted halls. You're back in the noble world, where even love has a set list and an audience. Somewhere in the great hall, jesters are already tuning their instruments, and servants shuffle to prepare for tonight's entertainment. It's another feast because, apparently, nothing rekindles longing like excessive carbs and performance art. You take a seat close to the back, the better to watch without being watched. Minstrels line the dais, adjusting lyres, fiddles, and tabors, while jugglers swap tricks and laughter. This is the medieval equivalent of an open mic night, but many of the songs are about heartbreak, devotion, or some noble lady fairer than spring's embrace. These tunes weren't just background noise, they were subtle carriers of ideas. Each melody mapped the moral geography of romance. Who's allowed to love, who must despair elegantly, and who ends up writing bad poetry about it afterward. The first jester's skit begins, involving a knight, a shepherdess, and an outrageously fake goat. Everyone howls with laughter when the knight falls into a barrel. But between the jabs, the story hides a moral. Love and pride make fools even of nobility. You realize how clever entertainment had to be, then every joke double-coded, every song carrying a message, even when no one said it aloud. One performer, a gray-haired minstrel with half a set of teeth, steps forward next and plucks a slow chord. For the lady whose eyes outshine the hearth fire, he declares, and the hall hushes. His voice trembles on purpose. It's not just skill, it's theater. The audience isn't merely listening, they're participating, mentally assigning names to his lady. Every noble present wants to believe the song is secretly about them. Historians still argue whether troubadour culture created genuine artistic freedom or simply trained people to romanticize obedience. But whatever its origin, the effect is undeniable. The mood in the room shifts, laughter softens into silence. Even the servants pause their work. For 5 minutes, poetry carries more authority than rank. Sitting nearby, you spot a young jester lingering at the edge of the crowd. He's not performing, just watching the hall's most radiant guest, a woman with pearl-dotted hair and a smile much too reckless for her reputation. His gaze holds that quiet ache familiar to all uninvited dreamers. You see him glance toward his lute as if considering a confession through song, but think better of it. Truth told aloud here can wound as easily as a muse. Still, he'll get his chance. Because jesters also flirted in plain sight, using humor as armor. One quirky tidbit. In some courts, jesters penned ribald songs that pretended to mock lords but secretly courted the ladies listening. A clever verse could either earn a kiss or a whipping, depending on who recognized themselves in it. Dangerous work for a profession defined by laughter. The performance continues a love ballad sung by two youthful minstrels harmonizing beneath a bright tapestry. Their voices rise, then twine like candle flames. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining lovers across the centuries finding each other through these lyrics. The melodies are syrupy, but comforting. They remind you why people risk scandal for moments like this for words that said, "What daily life censored?" When the dancers enter, the tone changes. The music quickens, drums replace lutes. Silk gowns ripple like waves as couples glide between the torches. The dance here is still coded no lingering touches, no private glances, but within its geometry hides rebellion. A misstep, a deliberate delay, a shared laugh, all tiny insurrections against restraint. You catch one pair exchanging something invisible mid-spin, a folded scrap of paper, slipped hand to hand. Love always finds rhythm where it isn't a loud voice. You notice the jesters retreat to the back, gathering around a pitcher of wine. Their faces are weary but merry. They're the only ones truly free here, yet they never stop performing. One of them, still strumming idly, catches your attention. He sings quietly for no audience, the kind of tune made not for reputation, but relief. The words, in rough old French, say, loosely translated, "Even fools know when love starts to hurt." It's barely above a whisper, but it shakes something loose in you anyway. Elsewhere, the nobles applaud another dance, oblivious. In their world, love's danger is an accessory, something to romanticize then set neatly aside at dawn. But for the lower voices, the musicians, the couriers, the servants, it's raw sustenance, sung because silence would kill it. The feast wears on. Plates clatter, candles drip, jokes grow louder and progressively less appropriate. You sip mead and let the chaos wash over you. Everything feels timeless, an eternal loop of performance, applause, and yearning. Yet beneath it all simmers an unspoken truth, that art kept humanity breathing when everything else demanded obedience. Later, when the crowd thins, you wander behind the dais. The air smells of sweat, wax, crushed grapes. The performers are packing up, their laughter quiet and unguarded now. The older minstrel nods to you. "Music," he says between sips, "is the only love we can share without consequence." He grins, then clutches his lute and begins another tune for the empty benches, a lullaby about a lady waiting for dawn. You stay until the last note fades, carried upward into vaulted darkness. It's not perfect, nothing here is, but it's honest, and that's the heartbeat running through this strange world. Even structured societies can't cage the creative magic of affection, not when people set it to melody. You leave the hall in silence, torches guttering behind you. Outside, the stars burn sharp and endless, the same ones lovers have stared at since time began. You exhale into the cold, half wishing you could carry that old minstrel song past the gates, to every place where love still hides behind laughter. The sun rises pale and frosty through curtains of cloud, and the castle hums again, but today, the air feels oddly tense, as if love itself has a new form to wear. Ink, law, and ledger. Gone are the songs and laughter from last night's hall. In their place, you hear the soft rhythm of quills and the clack of seals being pressed into wax. You can smell the parchment, the faint mineral scent of wet ink, the perfume of bureaucracy. Welcome to the true heartbeat of medieval romance, the marriage contract. You step quietly into a chamber where scribes in brown robes sit on benches, copying lines dictated by a steward. The phrases are flowery, yet cold names, dowries, inheritance clauses, promises written in a language designed to sound like affection, but smell like economics. A nobleman and his intended bride stand before the table, both sweating slightly though the air is cold. Their eyes don't meet. It's not that they dislike each other, it's that they've never really had the chance. The steward reads aloud, "And with this bond, all lands south of the river shall join with the estates of House Aubert, ensuring prosperity and mutual fidelity under God." You can almost feel Cupid rolling his eyes somewhere. Historians still argue whether arranged marriages in the Middle Ages were entirely cynical or simply practical within their time. Some records show genuine affection bloomed later, after the ink dried and years passed. Others tell of alliances gone tragically cold. Either way, one mainstream fact remains firm. Love was rarely the starting point. It was the reward for endurance or its casualty. The contract is sealed with a lump of red wax. The father of the bride exhales in relief. "A good match," he murmurs, counting imaginary sheep in his head. The couple exchange rings that symbolize union but function more like receipts. The romance is mostly symbolic still. The spectators applaud politely. Somewhere outside, a lute plays, perhaps out of habit, not celebration. You follow the procession to the great hall, where preparations for the wedding feast have begun. The tables gleam with roasted birds, currant pies, and endless cups of spiced wine. Servants weave through the crowd carrying dishes that smell divine and slightly intimidating. But what interests you more than the meal is the undercurrent of half-whispered gossip. "She's lucky," one woman says. "He owns 3 vineyards." "He's luckier," another replies. "Her dowry equals 2. This is courtly commerce disguised as destiny. And yet, in their polite indifference, you catch hints of hope. The groom steals glances at his new wife, shyly, as if testing the idea of affection. She doesn't smile, but she doesn't flinch either. Maybe that's enough for a beginning. A quirky tidbit surfaces to lighten the mood. In some regions of medieval Europe, couples sealed marriage agreements by literally joining hands through a small church window, symbolizing trust while ensuring they didn't sneak a full embrace. Later, the priest would bless the exchange, and the window would close, mercilessly symbolic. You imagine awkward handshakes and nervous giggles muffled by stone. After the formal vows, the feast begins properly. Everyone rises as the newlyweds take their seats under an embroidered canopy. Trays arrive endlessly. Toasts follow one another faster than the refills. Wine loosens tongues, and the hall morphs from solemnity to noisy celebration. Even the bride laughs now nervously at first, then genuinely. You recognize the moment love sometimes enters through the side door, disguised as shared amusement. And yet, alongside the merriment, a darker thread winds quiet and sure. Servants move between tables collecting uneaten food. Minstrels sing verses about loyalty so insistently it almost feels like warning. You lean closer to overhear an older priest muttering to a squire. "Marriages are more than affection," he says. "They are chess." You half smile. Cupid, it seems, loses many games here. Still, not every arrangement is doomed to ice. You recall stories, some true, some exaggerated, of noble couples who found equilibrium, comradeship even. One baroness, widowed young, remarried out of obligation, but ended her days describing her husband as "my dearest companion in laughter and prayer." It's not poetry, but it's peace, better than many love poems ever promised. By mid-afternoon, the hall smells of spilled ale and candle smoke. The bride disappears, flanked by maids. The groom is led away by drunken companions to prepare for the bedding ceremony, an event treated as half religious, half circus. You understandably keep your distance from that custom. It's all very public and deeply private all at once. Instead, you slip out through the side doors into the cool court air. Outside, the contrast is striking. The sky is wide and empty. Pups bark from a distant stable, and the courtyard smells like wet stone. From here, you can still hear faint music drifting down from the upper floor, a slow, lilting tune that softens the edges of everything. Maybe someone inside felt what you do now, a strange sympathy for two people about to spend their lives turning parchment promises into something human. A servant hurries past carrying leftover bread. You ask where he's going. To the tenants, he says. It's good luck to share the wedding meal. You watch him disappear down the hill, and the thought lingers perhaps marriage here isn't one grand romance, but 1,000 small gestures of survival and shared fortune. Maybe affection doesn't need to arrive first. Maybe it grows from gratitude and habit, branching like ivy until it becomes part of the wall itself. The shadows lengthen. Laughter spills one last time from the high windows, fading into the dusk. You turn and glance up toward the tower where a faint golden light burns. Two figures move beyond the curtain's slow, uncertain silhouettes. For all the contracts and negotiation, for all the politics disguised as poetry, this moment belongs to them only. You step back into the dark, letting them have it, even if the rest of the world already claimed everything else. You wake in the hush just before dawn, when the sky still trembles between silver and blue. The castle stones release the night's chill, and outside, the watchtower torches flicker like exhausted stars. The celebrations from the marriage feast have ended, the songs long gone, but not all stories end neatly with vows. Some begin afterward, in whispers, behind doors best left shut. Today, you step into the hidden world of medieval scandals, forbidden love, midnight meetings, and the kind of risks that made poets famous and sinners infamous. You start your day wandering the quiet cloisters of the castle garden. The air is thick with dew, and the roses are heavy with scent. A pair of noblewomen walk slowly along the path, heads close, murmuring in tones meant only for each other. Their words slip into the rhythm of secrets. Who met whom, which knight stayed too long by which lady's chamber, whose husband is away on pilgrimage a little too often. Two gardeners nearby pretend not to listen, though every glance says otherwise. Gossip, you realize, is currency spent freely but never forgotten. Historians still argue whether the Middle Ages were more prudish or more permissive than we think, but one thing's certain, human curiosity bloomed stronger than any moral decree. You linger by a stone bench beneath an archway. On its surface, nearly hidden by moss, someone has carved initials entwined with a heart-shaped knot. The carving is old, deliberate, likely made at night when the garden was silent and only moonlight dared to witness. It's not shocking by modern standards, but here, it's defiance chiseled into eternity. You imagine the scene, a lady pacing her chamber after midnight, candlelight painting her walls gold. She listens for the guard's footsteps to fade, then slips through a side door in a wool cloak, avoiding torches. Down in the dark courtyard, a figure waits, maybe a knight, maybe a poet, or maybe just someone forbidden by station or vow. One hand signal, one soft laugh swallowed by frost, and the space between them collapses. All that poetry about unattainable love you've heard begins to make sense, because half the thrill comes from knowing they are one candle away from ruin. A curious story comes to mind, one old chronicle you once read about a queen whose affection for her knight became the talk of every court in Europe. Was she reckless or desperate? Historians still argue whether her letters were genuine or forged by rivals. But the scandal itself reshaped entire alliances, marriages, wars. In that age, love wasn't private, it was political wildfire. You follow the memory with a grin when you realize how similar human hearts remain. Turn power into a playground, and someone will sneak under the table to steal a kiss. Still, punishment was no joke. An exposed affair could end with exile, confiscated lands, even execution. The church called it adultery. Poets called it devotion. The condemned often called it simply worth it. That's the thread running through centuries of whispered passion from royal scandals to monastic rumors. Always the same quiet bravery nestled inside recklessness. You step beyond the gardens, into the old courtyard, where hay still clings to the corners. Here, you find a stable hand cleaning bridles while humming a love song that feels far too beautiful for early morning labor. He catches your gaze and grins. It's about Sir Alaric and the Duke's niece, he says proudly, as if reciting family lore. They met every fortnight near the river until the Duke found out. He sent the knight to the border wars and locked the girl in a nunnery, but rumor says she climbed the wall the same night. He chuckles. Romance and trouble. Same horse, different saddle. You laugh softly, charmed by the phrase. Legends grow fast here, sometimes sprouting exaggeration faster than truth. Yet the deeper you listen, the more you sense that these tales kept people alive, a kind of nighttime rebellion against all the daytime rules. Passing the chapel, you notice candles still burning inside. You step closer and peek through the door. A priest kneels before the altar, perhaps seeking forgiveness for the confessions he's heard. You wonder how many secrets have echoed inside those walls, how many trembling voices have admitted to affections misplaced. For every saint painted in gold, someone must have whispered a sin shaped exactly like love. And then there were the go-betweens, the servants, maids, and scribes who shuttled messages or guarded doorways during these dangerous encounters. Their loyalty bought with silver, their silence worth more than their lives. One quirky tidbit, some households even employed a whisper maid, halfway between confidant and accomplice, specializing in carrying coded messages between lovers. That's right, professional discretion as an occupation. Only in the Middle Ages could intrigue become a job description. As night returns, you cross a small bridge outside the castle walls where the moon breaks in the moat like shattered glass. You pause halfway, hearing faint laughter in the reeds below. Two shadows move carefully near the bank, a secret meeting, real or imagined. You don't call out, you simply watch. The scene feels older than time itself. Risk meeting desire under a canopy of judgment. The lovers or co-conspirators speak little. Their gestures say everything. A touch becomes an oath, a sigh becomes history. In that moment, you realize something vital. Even repression can't drain passion. It only sharpens it. Every rule birthed a rebellion. Every ban on emotion made love an act of courage. You pull your cloak tighter as the wind sighs through the rushes. The couple disappears into the trees, gone as quietly as they came. You feel oddly peaceful knowing they will leave no trace but memory. Tomorrow, the world will resume its order, the priests will preach, nobles will sign treaties, but tonight belongs to those who defied it all for the briefest chance at tenderness. You look once more at the moon glimmering on the water and whisper to yourself, some truths don't need to survive to matter. The reflection shivers with the breeze, and you walk away smiling, half in awe, half in melancholy, knowing you've glimpsed the oldest kind of rebellion. The morning unfolds slowly, as if the sky is stretching after a long night. You feel it before you see it. The gentle chime of distant bells, rising and falling like a steady breath. Their sound rolls across the stone walls, slipping through arrow slits and over tiled roofs, before finally reaching you as a soft reminder that this world likes its days to begin with calm. You walk along a narrow passageway, the stone beneath your feet cool and faintly damp from the night. The air smells of beeswax, old wood, and a trace of smoke that lingers from last evening's fires. Ahead, light spills through a rounded doorway, quietly inviting you forward. You step through and find yourself in the cloister, a square of open sky framed by covered walkways with a small garden resting in the middle like a held breath. The grass out there glows with dew, each droplet catching the light in tiny flashes. Herbs grow in tidy beds, sage, thyme, rosemary, and a few pale flowers that lean lazily toward the sun. A monk shuffles past you, his sandals whispering over the flagstones. He nods without hurry, hands folded inside his sleeves, moving as though he has all the time in the world and nothing to prove. On one side of the cloister stands the chapel. Heavy wooden doors, iron hinges, and a stone arch carved with simple patterns worn smooth by centuries of hands. You move toward it slowly, noticing how each footstep seems to grow quieter the closer you come. The bells give one last gentle peal, then fall into silence as if the building itself is drawing in, waiting. Inside, the light changes. It's softer here, filtered through narrow stained glass windows in blues, reds, and muted golds. The patterns spill across the stone floor in quiet patches, gently shifting as the sun climbs. Candles line the walls, their flames steady and small. They do not flicker dramatically, they simply hold their place, like watchful eyes that never fully close. A few priests and monks move about the space, placing books, straightening cloths, checking that everything is in order for the next prayer or ceremony. Their movements are unhurried, careful without being tense. You can tell they have done this half their lives. The chapel is not a stage for them. It is a familiar room where promises and worries come to rest for a while. Near the front, a couple kneels on a simple bench. Their hands are lightly joined, fingers resting against fingers rather than gripping tight. They are not dressed in rich brocades or glittering jewels, a modest gown, a plain but well-made tunic. Behind them stand a small cluster of relatives and neighbors, a mother twisting her shawl, a father shifting his weight from one leg to the other, a younger sibling watching with big, curious eyes. The priest's voice is calm and gentle as he speaks, not booming, not theatrical, just steady, like a stream that has flowed along the same bed for many years. He talks about patience, about keeping one another safe, about sharing burdens and days. In the medieval world, marriage has slowly come to be seen not just as a private agreement or a family arrangement, but as something sacred, blessed in front of this community and before God. It is meant to be a binding of lives, a partnership for work, for raising children, for sheltering each other against the hard corners of the world. For the couple, though, the meaning lives somewhere smaller and closer. It rests in how their shoulders brush as they kneel, in the way they take turns breathing deeply before answering the priest's questions. They promise to be faithful, to care, to stay. These words have been spoken many times by many mouths, but for them, this is the first time and the only time that matters. Historians who look back at this age will talk about how strongly the church shaped ideas of marriage, how rules and rituals tried to guide people into stable households and clear responsibilities. They will debate how much was control and how much was protection, how much came from devotion and how much from habit. But here, in this room, none of that argument matters. What matters is the way the couple leans ever so slightly toward each other when the blessing is spoken, as if the words themselves are a warm cloak being laid gently across their shoulders. When the priest raises his hands in final blessing, there is no thunder, no beam of light from the sky, just a quiet pause in which everyone present seems to exhale at the same time. A soft murmur of approval ripples through the little group behind them. A mother lets out the breath she has been holding. A brother attempts a clumsy smile that looks half teasing, half proud. The couple rises, still joined at the hands, and for a moment they look like two people standing at the edge of a river they have chosen to cross together, unsure what lies beyond, but certain they won't be walking alone. You slip out of the chapel through a side door and back into the cloister. The air feels lighter somehow, as if the small promises made inside have gently rearranged the day. Monks pass by with baskets of bread. A young acolyte struggles under the weight of a jug of water, laughing when it sloshes a little onto his shoes. In one corner, a woman lights a slim candle at a small niche in the wall, her eyes closed for just a heartbeat of silent hope for her family, perhaps, or for someone far from home. In this world, the church is not simply a building or a set of rules. It is woven into the pattern of daily life. People come here to mark beginnings and endings, births, marriages, illness, and loss. They come to ask for strength when their hands are tired from work, when their hearts are uneasy, when their choices feel heavy. The ceremonies, the bells, the prayers, the quiet corners for reflection, they all exist to give shape to feelings that might otherwise seem too big or too tangled to carry alone. You walk along the covered walkway, listening to the muffled sounds of the town beyond the walls. Vendors calling, carts rolling, someone laughing sharply at a joke only they can hear. The chapel sits at the center of all that noise, like a still pool in the middle of a busy square. Love, in this place, is not always grand or dramatic. Often it is quiet and practical, a promise to share bread, to keep a roof repaired, to sit by someone's bed when they are ill. The couple you saw kneeling will leave the chapel and return to that world of muddy streets and crowded rooms. They will have disagreements and small joys, days that blur into each other, and moments that stand out like clear bells. They won't remember every line of the blessing spoken over them today. What they will remember is the feeling of standing side by side, watched not by judgment, but by a circle of faces that wish them well. You pause at the edge of the garden and watch a line of laundry sway gently in the breeze, a simple sight, shirts and linens, and a single piece of cloth that might become a cradle blanket one day. The sunlight lands softly on the stone around you, warming it bit by bit. A bee drifts lazily past your shoulder, then disappears into a patch of flowers. For a moment, you simply breathe. The bells are quiet now. The candles inside the chapel keep burning, small but stubborn. And you understand that, in this age, love is held together not by grand declarations, but by many small, repeated gestures, blessings spoken in low voices, hands joined before a plain altar, and two people walking home together through the same familiar gate, ready to face whatever comes, side by side. The morning air is sharp enough to wake even the sleepiest night. You follow the distant clang of armor and the far-off blare of a trumpet toward the barracks yard, where men stretch, polish swords, and nervously adjust every strap that might fall loose in battle or perhaps in front of someone watching. This world hums with iron and adrenaline, but underneath it beats something softer, because behind every banner and blade, there's another invisible emblem someone's favor. You watch as a young squire kneels, painfully earnest, while his lady ties a strip of embroidered silk around his arm. The color glows against his chainmail, too delicate for war, too sacred to question. She murmurs, "For courage," and his grin is equal parts pride and terror. It's the most enduring exchange of the age-love disguised as inspiration, devotion dressed as duty. Historians still argue whether knights truly fought for their ladies or simply for honor and gold. But one mainstream truth stands steady. Chivalric culture wove love into its mythology like thread into armor padding. Fighting for God was noble. Fighting for a woman was human. And humans needed both to make meaning out of fear. You step closer as the knights prepare for departure. Horses stamp and snort clouds into the frosty air. Each animal glitters with brass fittings. Each rider wears the sort of stoicism reserved for ceremony. Yet, scattered among that stoicism are hints of vulnerability, a hand gripping a pendant under a collar, a kiss pressed to mail before the visor drops. This isn't just readiness for war, it's emotional theater. You realize that leaving always made people romantic before they were rational. A priest begins his blessing, sprinkling holy water across the assembled riders. It sparkles in the dawnlight before sliding down steel like tears. You notice one knight clutching a ring on a chain, small, simple, copper. You wouldn't think it belonged to nobility, yet his eyes linger on it as if it were the crown jewels. One of his comrades nudges him teasingly. Still thinking of her? The knight grins without denial. Love, apparently, wasn't as private as it pretended to be. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you watch them mount up. Medieval superstition held that wearing a lover's token could literally preserve one's life, not symbolically literally. Knights believed the fabric carried the beloved's spirit, a charm against arrows and misfortune. Maybe that belief was desperate, but so is courage. Faith in protection, divine or romantic, feels the same when the world turns violent. The captain shouts commands, and the troop begins to ride out, hooves pounding like an enormous heartbeat. Dust rises and scatters gold in the morning light. The women wave from the walls, some silent, some already crying. You can't help but imagine the mix of worry and pride in each face. The men vanish over the ridge, and suddenly the courtyard feels emptier, though the sound of them still echoes in the ribs of the walls. You follow the women as they retreat. The lady who tied the favor on her knight's arm lingers last, fingers brushing the stone parapet as though it still vibrates from the horse's passage. When she finally turns, her expression is poised, but her knuckles whiten around her silk shawl. "We wait," she says simply when someone asks what comes next. Waiting, it seems, is its own battlefield. Days pass, or maybe hours. It's hard to tell in this slow rhythm of absence. You wander through the hall where ladies embroider banners or pray for victories they'll never witness. The atmosphere feels suspended, charged by longing turned ritual. One hums a quiet melody, half lullaby, half lament. The tune loops endlessly, woven into the sound of thread pulling through cloth. You pause near the window. Servants move below, fetching messages from riders returning south. Each letter's arrival shifts the air hope before it's opened, dread after. You overhear snatches, news from Normandy. The siege holds, the weather's cursed. But somewhere amid the logistical chatter, one servant hesitates and glances up toward the lady with the blue eyes. "My lady," he dares softly. Sir Aldrich sends his heart. She closes her eyes, quietly, as if translating grief into gratitude before speaking. "Tell him," she murmurs, "mine travels with food. It's not poetry, but it's nourishment all the same." A few weeks later, a messenger limps through the gates, dusty and hollow-eyed. He carries a banner, its edges burned, and the courtyard stiffens as though the castle itself forgets how to breathe. Someone cries out a name, then falls silent. You can see that the silk favor now hanging limp from his hand is ash-stained, its once bright threads muted. It's a jarring reminder that symbols cut both ways, they burn just as beautifully as they bless. That night, the hall transforms into sanctuary. Candles light every corner. A minstrel plays a soft song not of victories, but of endurance. You sit near the back, watching the survivor's ritual unfold. Letters reread until the ink bleeds, rings kissed, prayers whispered. You sense why love mattered so much in wartime. It gave loss, meaning, turned fear into devotion. It made every death something more than an accident. It made it for someone. One old knight limps past you, holding a broken spur. "She gave it to me before I left," he says quietly, "though you hadn't asked. Said I'd never need two if I rode carefully." He laughs once, hoarse, nostalgic, then adds, "She was smarter than the Pope." You grin, unable to disagree. When dawn comes again, the courtyard fills not with warriors, but rebuilding. Life continues exactly as the church would prefer, steady, dutiful, but under the surface, love's defiance hums along. Every stitch in a new banner, every repaired helm, every prayer whispered before meals carries memory, and memory is just another word for affection that refuses to die. You climb the tower one last time and look out across the empty fields. They stretch golden with stubble now, war faded into rumor. In the breeze, something flutters, a single piece of blue silk caught on a branch, tattered but stubborn. You reach out to free it, letting the fabric slip through your fingers. For a heartbeat, it feels alive, pulsing with all the hope and heartbreak sewn into it. Then the wind carries it off and away, vanishing into bright sky. You smile, half mournful, half proud. Even when armor rusts and stories fade, love leaves fragments behind threads waiting to be rediscovered by anyone curious enough to look up and wonder who once dared to tie them there. The morning sun filters lazily through latticed windows, settling on a figure draped in black silk. You're back in the great hall, but the laughter and lute music have thinned, replaced by the soft murmurs of condolence. The air smells faintly of ashes, candle smoke, and the sharp citrus tang of incense, the perfume of mourning. You've walked into one of the most complicated states of medieval love, widowhood. Around you, servants move quieter than usual, their shoes whispering over the stone. At the center table sits a woman young, perhaps no more than 30 though in this world. That's already a story written in its second act. Her husband has died in campaign, and now she occupies that strange liminal space, half free, half bound, watched closely by everyone who calls themselves family or advisor. Widows were dangerous in their way. They owned property. They controlled household keys, ledgers, and reputations. They could, in rare and carefully negotiated circumstances, choose again love on their own terms. Or they could retreat into piety, cloaking themselves in mourning veils thicker than the politics surrounding them. Every choice carried risk. Historians still argue whether widowhood was a sentence or an emancipation. Maybe it was both. You stand at the edge of the solar as the lady folds a letter she's been rereading. Her hands are steady, her face serene. But when she catches you watching, she smiles faintly and says, "Do you know, sometimes grace looks like survival?" Her voice crackles with exhaustion and a hint of freedom. A priest eventually arrives, offering sympathy disguised as theology. "God has reclaimed his servant," he says. "You must rejoice in heaven's mercy." Her reply is quiet but quick. God can have his servant. The fields and dowry, however, remain mine. There's a soft chuckle in the corner, one of the maids barely holding it in. The priest, scandalized, mumbles a quick blessing and retreats. You want to applaud. Later, as she walks the courtyard, the widow pauses near a fig tree blazing green against the stone. She reaches up to pinch a leaf between her fingers, eyes distant. "I will not remarry soon," she murmurs, "but I'll not stay caged either." You follow at a respectful distance as she dismisses her attendants and moves toward the outer garden. It surprises you how alive this place feels. There's no dirge here, no statue still sadness. Grief in this age hums with activity. Mourning women stitch veils, host prayers, tend to ledgers. Unlike romanticized despair, widowhood is practical finances, alliances, household duties. But under that surface, there's also a quiet, stubborn current of longing. Many marriages were political. Real affection often arrived late, sometimes after one partner's death. That's the cruel symmetry of life here. By the time you truly understand someone, there's no one left to tell. One quirky tidbit: medieval widows often wore special mourning clothes called weeds, not just out of respect, but as protection. Those black veils announced to the world, approach carefully. Yet paradoxically, they drew admiration too. Black symbolized virtue and dignity qualities that made certain widows desirable prospects all over again. You imagine the silent courtship happening even now. Subtle glances from visiting knights, discreet messages through chaplains. Affection and ambition forever braided together. As days pass, you notice the widow's routine changing. The first week, she attended Mass with trembling lips. By the third, she walks through the garden humming softly under her breath. Grief hasn't left, it's merely learned to breathe. One afternoon, she pauses near the smithy, watching a young man shoe a horse. He's strong, quiet, respectful. Their conversation is polite, brief, but afterward, she tucks a stray curl behind her ear, and you catch her smiling for the first time in days. It's not scandal. Not yet, but gossip here grows like ivy clinging to surfaces spreading wide. Within hours, servants in the kitchens are whispering about unseemly warmth. You find that ridiculous. 2 words exchanged, and already the parish is plotting remarriage. The chaplain warns her to remain circumspect. She just laughs. So long as circumspection allows sunlight. Over dinner that week, she invites the neighboring steward to discuss harvest revenues. Their discussion drifts into stories of youth, then into laughter. Her relatives look horrified, as though joy itself violates decorum. You realize she's breaking a quiet rule. She's alive too soon. Historians still debate whether such women were heroes of autonomy or merely practical survivalists. Perhaps both are true. In Letters That Survive, widows write in tones more modern than their age, frustrated with guardians, wary of suitors, but fiercely protective of independence. "God took my husband," one wrote, "but left my reason intact." You can almost hear the echo of today's voice in that centuries-old ink. As night draws close, the widow stands on the balcony overlooking the town. Torches flicker below, mirroring stars above. She leans her elbows on the cold stone, sighing into the quiet. "He was kind," she says softly to no one in particular. "I did love him, in the end." The admission settles like a gentle wave truth without tragedy. Then she adds, but I still have summers left. You can't help but smile at that, a confession of intent, not regret. Inside, an old maid whispers warnings about decorum, propriety, and patience. The lady listens, nodding politely. Then, once alone, she removes her black veil and folds it into a small square. She sets it on the table beside her bed and blows out the candle. In the sudden dark, that single folded veil catches a stray moonbeam before fading to shadow. A silent rebellion, a beginning disguised as rest. By dawn, she'll wear gray instead of black. Still proper, but lighter, more fluid. Life continues, even daring to glimmer. Love may not come galloping, but it might stroll softly through the gate one afternoon, smelling of hay and sunlight. She'll be ready when it does. You leave her there in her quiet defiance, thinking about how loss often births strength, and strength, in turn, attracts new possibility. In this world of endless rules, sometimes love's greatest victory isn't passion, it's persistence. You're drifting through twilight again, and this time the night doesn't taste of wine or grief, it tastes faintly of rosemary, honey, and something a little suspicious. You've wandered into another branch of the medieval love labyrinth, the realm of alchemy, astrology, and what one generous chronicler called remedies for the heart. In short, where science failed and religion disapproved, people turned to magic. The scene opens in a dim cottage on the edge of the castle grounds. Bunches of herbs hang from the ceiling like green chandeliers, bottles crowd the shelves, and an old woman mutters to herself while grinding something bright red in a mortar. You can tell immediately this isn't your average apothecary. The smell is thick, not unpleasant, but intoxicating the perfume of superstition. A charm for the lovesick, she explains when you peek in. Costs only a prayer and a coin. Based on her grin, the coin matters more. Love potions were as common as heartbreak itself. Recipes varied wildly. Some called for cinnamon and rosewater, others for frankly alarming things like ashes of pigeon hearts or hair steeped in milk. The principle, though, stayed constant: blend something beautiful with something a little dangerous, and hope emotions follow. One mainstream historical fact. Some of these so-called tonics actually worked as mild narcotics. So, yes, medieval people sometimes experienced passionate dizziness. It just came from the herbs. The woman stirs her brew, humming something that sounds halfway between hymn and spell. A single sip, she promises, and the beloved's heart shall burn like yours. You decide not to test that, mostly because the potion is the color of despair mixed with jam. Still, she isn't entirely a fraud. Many early healers, especially women, genuinely studied the body's reactions. They just wrapped their knowledge in faith and secrecy to avoid accusations of witchcraft. Historians still argue whether these women were proto-scientists or simply desperate romantics with pestles. Outside, the night wind picks up, carrying strange scents from the forest moss, rose hips, wet bark. You follow a narrow path to another kind of fortune hunter, the astrologer. His hut tilts dangerously, stuffed with astrolabes, star charts, and a cat that looks like it's seen too much. He greets you with unblinking enthusiasm. All hearts are written in the heavens. He gestures grandly toward a cracked parchment covered in symbols that look like someone's enthusiastic doodle. Astrology ruled medieval love as definitively as personal taste. Birth hours, star alignments, even comets determined compatibility. A Leo pairing with a Capricorn? Tragic. A Virgo with Pisces? Practically divine. You glance over his charts and find scribbled notes like, avoid Thursday weddings unless Venus is ascendant. You picture generations of couples checking the sky before scheduling vows. Romantic, in a complicated way. The astrologer explains in a conspiratorial whisper that Venus's retrograde motion this season promises unruly passions among the dowager class. You nearly laugh out loud. Without realizing it, you're glimpsing the medieval version of horoscopes shoved between gossip columns and moral sermons. The irony? Peasants couldn't always read, but nobles paid a fortune for these cosmic forecasts. He presses a small charm into your hand, a brass coin etched with interlocking circles. For harmony, he says. Hang it by your bed, and dreams will reveal your heart's path. You tuck it carefully into your pocket, wondering whether dreams ever needed help speaking. Wandering back toward the castle village, you find stalls still glowing with lamplight. Traders from far cities sell powders, crystals, and small scrolls promising true affection. You hear the words Italian aphrodisiac whispered more than once in tones equal parts scandalous and hopeful. Yet amid all this charlatanry, real knowledge hides. Apothecaries have discovered certain herbs, mint, saffron, even nutmeg press the blood faster, stirred warmth, sharpened senses. The line between potion and placebo has always been thin. One quirky tidbit from a nearby friar makes you grin. Some monks secretly brewed tonic of amaranth, an old floral draught reputed to stir the humors of the heart. Officially, it was for melancholy. Unofficially, it was liquid courage for shy lovers writing letters. Even the pious sometimes needed an excuse for bravery. When you return to the castle gate, smoke trails from the chimneys like spellwork dissolving into air. A young page dashes past holding a sachet filled with lavender, obviously stolen from the herbalist's stall. You ask what it's for. His answer comes in a rush. To put under Lady Beatrice's pillow makes her dream of the giver. You watch him sprint away, and part of you wants to warn him that if the wrong person finds that pouch, he'll be cleaning stables until Christmas. Then again, maybe that's the point. Every dream needs risk. Farther along, a priest confronts a merchant selling charms. Their argument boils down to theology versus demand. You sell sin disguised as sympathy, the priest growls. No, the man retorts cheerfully. I sell possibility. You whistle under your breath and keep walking, deciding that's the closest anyone's come to summarizing human nature in one line. As evening deepens, torches waver under the rising breeze. You step out past the crenellated walls to where the night opens wide, a dark dome pricked with stars. The constellations shimmer faintly the same ancient script astrologers read centuries ago. You tilt your head, tracing the arc of Venus just above the horizon. Maybe everyone who's ever loved has looked at that same point of light, hoping for a sign. Maybe the only real magic is persistence, the faith that someone, somewhere, is looking back. Behind you, the herbalist's laughter drifts on the wind, earthy and amused. The astrologer's cat yowls like a broken fiddle. You walk on until you find a still pond catching the reflection of that bright, wandering star. It trembles slightly in the water, a miniature miracle contained in mud and moonlight. You whisper, "Show me what love looked like then." And for a heartbeat, the reflection blurs, becoming not distant centuries, but your own beating pulse. Maybe that's the real alchemy after all, turning uncertainty into hope, transforming longing into action. No bottled potion lasts forever, but the need to believe in one that's immortal. You smile at your mirrored self, then turn back toward the castle lights, carrying the scent of rosemary and starlight on your sleeves. You wake to the sound of hammers echoing across the courtyard, not the rhythm of construction, but of justice being staged. Heavy boots stamp, wooden tables creak, and the murmur of onlookers fills the air like a growing storm. Today, love doesn't wear perfume or poetry. It wears accusation and parchment. You've stumbled into one of the least romantic corners of medieval life, where affection and law collide. You step closer, heart uneasy, and find yourself at what passes for a courtroom, though it looks more like a makeshift theater. The judge's seat is carved high and grim. Below him waits a couple, hands clasped tight enough to leave marks. Whispers swirl, words like annulment, kinship, and adultery. These are not uncommon notes in the song of medieval relationships, people married too young, too closely related, or too politically disadvantageous. And where there's marriage, medieval Europe managed to invent bureaucracy. Historians still argue how consistent medieval courts were about love crimes. One fact stands steady. The church courts, rather than civic law, handled most marriage disputes. Love was technically a spiritual matter, and love gone wrong, a theological emergency. You listen as a bishop clears his throat and begins the accusation. The marriage, he declares, was never duly consummated. The crowd shifts, caught between curiosity and scandalized eagerness. The couple stares at the floor. You can practically hear their thoughts screaming, "We should not have invited witnesses to our domestic troubles." Medieval annulments weren't about divorce. Not exactly. They were erasures, legal acts pretending something never existed. One scholar later called it celestial whiteout. The grounds could be lack of consent, hidden disease, or that infamous phrase consanguinity. Marrying your cousin within 7 generations was both sinful and, inconveniently, common. With small villages and strategic alliances, it was hard not to bump into a relative on the altar. You edge toward the clerk's table to read one document. The Latin is faded, but phrases leap out. Inappropriate affections, improper proximity, unnatural fervor, bureaucratic poetry for heartbreak and gossip combined. Then comes another case, a more serious one. A knight stands accused of adultery by a husband who looks more furious than betrayed. Everyone knows this trial isn't about virtue, it's about property rights. If the wife's child isn't legitimate, lands and titles collapse like a badly built tower. The bishop sighs heavily before asking for proof. Somewhere, you imagine lawyers centuries later inheriting their professional cynicism from this exact moment. When it's the woman's turn to speak, her voice barely rises above the scrape of boots. "My heart was not my own," she says, trembling. "It was promised before ever I met my husband." The room softens. The judge even looks pained. But doctrine holds firm. Vows before men outweigh vows before feelings. Love loses to legality. Again, a quirky tidbit floats to mind. Medieval courts sometimes tested fidelity using ordeals. One story tells of a woman ordered to walk barefoot across iron plows after praying for divine vindication. She survived without a burn. Her accusers called it witchcraft anyway. The takeaway? Proof never mattered as much as who controlled the notion of sin. You turn your gaze away from the spectacle, following the murmur of the street outside. There, another ritual of law unfolds in smaller scale, a charivari, or rough justice. The villagers have caught wind of an old widower marrying a girl half his age. Their reaction? Pots and pans clanging, horns blaring, mock marching around the newlyweds' home. It's half protest, half celebration, a noisy reminder that communities loved balance more than happiness. Love might be divine, but public opinion ruled like God's second cousin. As dusk stretches across the cobblestones, you wander toward the town square, your head filled with contradictions. Here, public morality frames romance. Couples risk excommunication for secret vows. Poets and lawyers argue over the same thing: how much permission a heart should need. You think of those lovers back in the garden, the ones meeting under moonlight. Would they ever survive a courtroom like this? Probably not. But maybe that was the point. Love wasn't built for evidence. Later, back at the castle, you pass through a dim corridor lined with portraits. Most show noble faces frozen in propriety. But here and there, you spot something rebellious, 2 figures painted closer than etiquette allowed, a hand barely touching another, eyes meeting too directly. Art, it seems, hid what the law condemned. The painters knew every forbidden story finds a way to whisper through pigment and brushstroke. In the great hall, the lord of the manor dictates a letter to his scribe. To the ecclesiastical court, he says, "I petition for recognition of my daughter's union." Translation: she eloped, and now he needs paperwork before scandal grows sharp teeth. The scribe grinds his quill, sighing quietly. "Love," he mutters, "is the only crime we keep committing with hope." You slip through the back door into the courtyard, just as the chapel bells toll for evening prayer. The sound rolls down the valley, heavy as a verdict. Above, the sky glows the color of parchment. You catch yourself whispering, "If ever there was mercy for lovers, it must live somewhere higher than this." For a moment, silence answers. Then, faintly, laughter drifts from the barracks, two servants sharing an inside joke about the morning proceedings, mocking the sanctimony of it all. You grin despite yourself. Maybe that's the only justice love ever needed, not permission, not proof, but persistence in the face of every decree. You look at the last light slipping behind the rooftops and wonder how many hearts broke quietly so laws could hold steady. The bells stop ringing, the air sighs. You pat your pocket and feel the brass charm from the astrologer, two circles entangled, endless and imperfect. Somehow, it still fits. Because whether by potion, vow, or defiance, love outlasts verdicts. It always finds its loophole in the stars. You wake to music again, but not the delicate strum of a lute or the chanting of monks. This is noisier, rowdier, full of clapping, dogs barking, and the smell of roasted barley. You blink and find yourself not in a castle or sanctified hall, but in a village square so alive it almost hums. There's a ribbon hanging between two trees, a crowd gathered all around, and an old man shouting something about holy matrimony, plenty of ale, and no regrets till dawn. You, fortunately, have stumbled into a peasant wedding. Gone are the velvet curtains and golden chalices of noble unions. Here, love doesn't need heraldry. It just needs daylight, witnesses, and a vat of strong drink. The bride's gown is simple wool, her crown woven from wildflowers fading at the edges, and her groom's best tunic still carries the smell of sheep. Yet everything about the moment sparkles with sincerity. The village priest, clearly well fed on donations and beer alike, raises his hands. Let it be known, he announces, that no mischief shall part what God and gossip shall join. The crowd laughs and cheers, tossing dried herbs instead of gold coins. The ceremony itself is short a blessing, a clasping of hands, a few muttered instructions. Some couples didn't even need priests at all, in many regions saying, "I take you," before witnesses counted as binding marriage. Historians still argue whether that looseness caused freedom or chaos, but either way, it worked for most. When the officiation ends, the cheer multiplies. Handfast rope is tied around their wrists, a length of hemp, and dyed wool braided by the bride's friends. You think back to how easily nobles turned marriage into politics? Here, it's something closer to survival and joy combined. The rope doesn't symbolize property, it's a promise of partnership. Someone strikes up a fiddle, another beats a drum, and suddenly, the whole square becomes one spinning blur of motion. Even the chickens seem impressed. Children chase each other between tables. Someone sets fire to a meat spit, accidentally, supposedly, and old women pass mugs of ale large enough to drown inhibitions. You squeeze onto a bench beside a cobbler who's already halfway through his second drink. First weddings are for love, he says cheerfully. Second ones are for better decisions. You raise your cup in agreement. The man grins, showing one missing tooth but infinite warmth. The trick, he adds, is marrying someone who laughs as much as you do. Everything else can be bargained with. And laugh they do. The music grows wilder. A young girl grabs the priest's hat and dances it onto the groom's head. The bride pretends outrage, then dumps a mug of beer over his hair to wash him of vice. Everyone cheers as though witnessing the miracle of the century. You realize that humor here isn't decoration, it's intimacy. When lives revolve around hard work and harder weather, laughter is its own sacred vow. One quirky custom appears halfway through the feast. Bedding the bride. You tense automatically, expecting scandal, but it's more theatrical than anything else. Friends escort the couple to their chamber, if you can call a curtained bed in the same cottage a chamber, sing bawdy songs, throw grain on the floor for fertility, and shout blessings through laughter. Then they leave, loudly. Privacy returns, or something resembling it. Outside, the rest keep drinking. The fire burns tall, sparks leaping like fireflies into the night. Someone calls for love riddles, and a crooked-backed old woman begins, "What has a mouth but never speaks and warms your nights without eating?" When no one answers, she cackles. A husband! The entire table roars with laughter. But nestled inside all this humor are tiny, tender moments. You spot the bride later, feeding her new husband a crumb of bread by hand. He catches her wrist gently, kisses her fingers once, and you think there it is again, that timeless gesture that leaps across centuries. They may toil from tomorrow onward, but tonight, time itself bends to them. Historians sometimes romanticize peasants less than nobles, but you see there's richness here no embroidery could buy. These people measure love in work shared, fields tilled, and winters survived. Affection, one villager explains, is when he brings wood early because the wind's cruel. No ballads needed. The poetry exists in action. Beyond the firelight, groups drift away, some to stargaze, others to argue in the friendly way that ale demands. You follow a handful of youths toward the fields. They sing old harvest songs, refrains half in Latin, half in local slang. Their voices rise, rough but full of life, echoing under a wide sky that smells of hay and smoke. And then comes the cake, a chaotic pile of bread slices stacked high and drenched in honey. The newlyweds climb atop a bench, clasp hands, and lean across the table to kiss above it. If they manage without toppling the tower, it's good luck. They wobble precariously, cheers erupt, bread rains everywhere, but somehow they make it. One child shouts, "A fat harvest year," and everyone knocks on wood for safety. As the night deepens, exhaustion creeps in softly. The old fiddler slumps against his barrel, the priest snores near the fire, and lovers young and old lean on each other against the cool air. You sit aside for a moment, watching embers spiral upward, like wishes made visible. You realize there's a strange equality present in this chaos, different from court life, freer even than festivals. No one here loves under contract. They love because it helps them live. Affection isn't ceremonial, but stubborn. It weaves itself through routines of washing, plowing, sharing bread. The faith isn't in forever, it's in tomorrow. At last, the stars tilt high, torches sink low, and the singing fades into murmurs. Somewhere near the abandoned trestles, the bride's laughter rises one more time, soft, sleepy, and utterly content. It feels like the sound the universe makes when it forgives itself for being imperfect. You look toward the horizon, where faint dawn begins to flicker behind clouds, and think that perhaps this world understood something vital. Love can be grand, sacred, or tragic, but sometimes its truest form is muddy, exhausted, and still smiling. The day begins under a sky that looks washed in pale watercolor, soft blues and faint golds slowly unfolding over the hills. You stand at the edge of a broad, packed earth road, watching a small procession wind its way forward like a slow-moving ribbon. Horses step carefully, carts creak, and fabric rustles in the cool air. At first glance, it looks like any other traveling company. But as you listen more closely and notice the careful order of banners and riders, you realize this is something different. This is a journey meant to change not just one life, but the quiet balance between whole regions. Near the center rides a young noblewoman in a covered carriage. The shutters are open to the light, and every now and then you catch a glimpse of her face, calm but thoughtful. She is leaving the home she grew up in, its halls, its familiar kitchens, its little gardens, and traveling toward a castle she has never seen, to meet a husband she has never spoken to. The arrangement was decided long before this morning, written on parchment, sealed with colored wax, and carried by messengers between two courts. The marriage will bring land closer, ease tensions, smooth trade, promise cooperation. It is a bridge built not with stone, but with a shared household. Still, for her, this is not just an agreement or a line in a treaty. It is also the beginning of a new daily life. She looks out at the passing fields with the steady gaze of someone trying to memorize everything she can. The way the trees lean, the shape of roofs in each village, the exact color of the river that glints in the distance. Her ladies ride nearby, ready with water and blankets, but they also trade quiet jokes, hoping to draw out a smile. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes she only nods, lost in thought. As the sun rises higher, the procession stops at a small chapel perched on a low hill beside the road. It is simple whitewashed walls, a single bell, a wooden door polished by countless hands. Villagers from nearby have gathered, curious and cautious, to watch this rare parade pass by. Children peek from behind their parents' skirts. A few hold wildflowers, unsure whether they are meant to wave them or keep them. The noblewoman steps down from her carriage with care, her skirts lifted slightly to keep them out of the dust. She moves with that quiet poise that comes from years of being observed by tutors, by elders, by watchful relatives weighing her future. At the chapel door, a priest waits with a small silver bowl of water and a blessing prepared for travelers. His words are soft, carried off slightly by the breeze, but the meaning settles around everyone like a light cloak. May this journey be safe. May the union ahead bring calm. May those who meet learn to live kindly with each other. In a time when long conflicts can start over pride or boundaries, these hopes are more than polite phrases. They are a kind of wish for the road itself. Inside, the chapel is cool and dim. A few candles burn near a wooden cross. The company does not linger long, just enough time for a prayer, a small pause, a chance for the bride to stand quietly in one place and steady her thoughts. You can almost feel her breathing slow as she gazes at the candlelight, the flicker reflecting in her eyes. She doesn't know yet who her husband will be in temperament, gentle or distant, shy or talkative. But there is room, in this silence, to imagine that kindness might grow from their meeting, and that is something her heart can hold on to. Back on the road, the company moves again. The landscape rolls gently past, fields divided by hedges, patches of woodland, the occasional flock of sheep like little clouds scattered across the grass. At certain villages, people step outside their doors to watch. They've heard talk of this marriage, how it might mean fewer soldiers marching through, fewer markets disrupted, fewer sudden changes in taxes or rules. These practical hopes attach themselves softly to the young woman's passing carriage, like wishes tied to a traveling lantern. In time, the distant outline of her destination rises ahead. A town clustered along a river, stone walls tracing its edge, towers reaching up like fingertips toward the sky. The closer you get, the more detail appears: windows catching the light, banners hanging from balconies, a bridge spanning the water like an arm extended in greeting. The city feels alert, waking fully as news spreads that the procession is nearing. Bells ring in measured rhythm. Boats drift aside on the river to clear the view. People hurry to stand near the gate just to say they saw the moment when two worlds drew closer. At the main gate, guards stand with polished helmets and spears held upright. Just beyond, on a slightly raised platform, waits the young nobleman who is to be her husband. He is dressed in his best, but his posture gives away that he hasn't quite decided how someone is supposed to look when they're about to meet the person they will share a life with. His hands clasp and unclasp at his sides. He clears his throat once, then again. He keeps his eyes fixed on the approaching carriage as though it holds both his duty and his future, which, in many ways, it does. The carriage stops. A hush falls over the crowd, not the oppressive kind, but the curious, hopeful kind, as if the whole city is holding its breath very gently. The young woman steps down once more, this time onto unfamiliar ground. For a heartbeat, everything is still. The banners, the river, the crowd. Then she walks forward, and he walks to meet her, each step deliberate and modest. When they stand at last face to face, there is no grand speech, no sudden declaration. He bows, slightly but sincerely. She curtsies, with the careful grace she has practiced since childhood. His first words are simple. He welcomes her, asks whether the journey was kind to her, offers to show her the gardens where she can rest. Her answer is equally quiet. She thanks him, says she is grateful to have arrived safely, and that she looks forward to seeing the place that will be her new home. It is not a storybook spark, not a lightning strike moment. It is softer than that, like the way dawn gradually becomes full light. The people watching relax a little. You can almost feel their thoughts. They spoke kindly. That is a good start. Later, inside the castle's great hall, candles glow from iron sconces, and the air is filled with the murmur of voices and the sound of instruments playing gentle tunes. The feast laid out is generous but not overwhelming. Loaves of bread, roasted meats, fruits piled in wooden bowls, pitchers of watered wine. The couple sits on raised seats at the center table, not far apart, not quite close yet. Around them, advisors and relatives trade cautious conversation about weather, harvests, shared trade routes, and small stories of each land's customs. The nobleman leans slightly toward his new bride, pointing out a mural on the far wall, telling a short tale about a local legend. She listens, then answers with a story from her own home about a tree that blooms earlier than all the others, and how people there take it as a sign that good years are coming. Their eyes meet more easily now. It is the beginning of a language between them, made of small details and unhurried observations. As the evening wears on, you notice how the music in the hall grows softer, less celebratory, and more soothing. People laugh gently rather than loudly. There is relief in the air, as if this day, long planned and carefully arranged, has landed not with a crash, but with a quiet, steady touch. Peace does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives with people being willing to sit at the same table, to listen, to share stories about gardens and seasons rather than boundaries and battles. Outside, the city eases gradually into night. Market stalls are packed away. The last boats tie up along the riverbank, and windows begin to glow with lamplight, one by one, like distant fireflies. From a balcony overlooking the water, the young couple steps out for a few minutes of cooler air. The sky is darker now, the first stars beginning to appear as faint pinpricks above the rooftops. They stand side by side, without fanfare. Below them, the river moves at its steady pace, carrying reflections of lanterns and the fading stripes of dusk. Neither speaks for a little while. It is enough simply to share this view, this pause after a long, demanding day. At last, he says something small and sincere, perhaps about how the river floods in spring, but always recedes, leaving richer soil behind. She answers with a small, real laugh, saying she hopes the same might be true of the worries they've both brought with them. You sense that this is how many such medieval partnerships truly began, not with immediate, overwhelming affection, but with careful courtesy and the slow, patient work of turning duty into companionship. Over time, some unions like this would remain purely practical. Others would soften into real fondness, and sometimes even into deep love. No one watching on this first night can see that far ahead, but they can see this. Two people willing to stand quietly together and look in the same direction. As you leave the balcony scene to the privacy of its gentle silence, the city around you settles further into rest. The bells that rang earlier have grown still. A cool breeze curls through the streets, past shuttered shops and sleeping animals, and up along the castle walls. Somewhere a watchman's footsteps echo on stone, measured and unhurried. You walk along the outer rampart, listening to the soft chorus of distant sounds. Water, wind, the last fading notes of music. This world has used marriage as a tool of politics and peace for generations, tying lands together with vows and signatures. Yet, under all the formality, what seems to matter most in this moment is something very plain. The hope that two strangers can learn to treat each other gently. You pause, resting your hands on the cool stone, and watch the river slide steadily past in the dark. The reflections of the lanterns tremble slightly on its surface and then lengthen out, like stories being carried away towards some quiet future. In that sight, there is a kind of reassurance. Whatever treaties are written, whatever flags are raised or lowered, kindness between individuals still has room to exist. Your breathing slows to match the river's pace. The night feels less sharp, more like a blanket being drawn up over the city. Somewhere behind you, the couple returns indoors, back to their new roles and the many small conversations that will slowly shape their shared life. You turn away from the battlements and walk down the steps toward your own rest, carrying with you the gentle thought that not all important things begin with a spark. Some begin with a steady light and the quiet decision to keep it burning. The world wakes slowly around you, not with the clang of bells or lutes, but with birdsong mingled with murmuring travelers. You find yourself near a crossroad where prayer flags stir in the wind and boots scuff dusty paths leading in every direction. The scene feels restless pilgrims, traders, and wanderers brushing shoulders, each chasing some version of salvation or escape. Love, you begin to realize, often traveled too, especially in a world without comfort or control. Romance like to hitchhike on hope. You follow a line of pilgrims trudging toward an abbey in the distance, their wooden staves knocking in unison like a heartbeat. Among them walks a young man carrying a letter sealed with a wax heart, tucked under his arm, a folded kerchief embroidered with initials. "For my betrothed," he explains when you ask. "She's gone to Canterbury with her family. Her father insists prayers cure everything." He smiles, half hopeful. "I'm praying she still wants me by the end of Lent." You grin at that, realizing pilgrimage is doubling as the medieval version of a long-distance relationship. At the abbey gates later, the courtyard looks like an early form of social media feed messages scrawled on wooden boards, parchments posted by hands seeking spouses, work, or pen pal prayers. Seeking a God-fearing widower, moderately prosperous, sound of temper. Another reads, "Woman of 30 winters seeks man to share grazing rights and laughter." You can't help chuckling. Even centuries ago, people were advertising tenderness with logistics. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrimage routes were genuinely spiritual journeys or early matchmakers' circuits. Travel, after all, offered anonymity, a rare freedom. Far from home, reputations blurred. Strangers spoke first names without titles. And in the din of taverns and chapels, love became accidentally permissible. Leaving the abbey grounds, you stumble into what could only be described as a medieval fair disguised as a devotional stop. Merchants sell shells, relics, and saint amulets alongside trinkets tagged "From Lovers Past." One woman sells small mirrored pendants to reflect the beloved's face when separated. You buy one, hold it up, and see your own reflection blinking back. Maybe that's the point the loved one is, whoever you remember hard enough to see. Nearby, a group of young women gathers near a storyteller. He's reciting in lilting rhyme a legend of two pilgrims who met on the road from Rome and fell in love walking side by side, measuring devotion by shared blisters. The moral isn't pious, it's practical, he ends with. If you pray with someone long enough, you'll find more than salvation. The crowd applauds and tosses him bread. Romance, it seems, is universal tourism's oldest souvenir. As evening falls, you watch others find small moments of connection in the chaos of movement. Two tradesfolk lean too close at a map, pretending to argue directions. A widow and a guard share a flask by the fire, shoulders brushing. Even the monks can't resist murmured laughter when a young nun trips over her robes. In each encounter, you see how motion, not stability, stirs affection. Love here happens between destinations. One quirky tidbit. In some towns, local clerks kept ledgers of travelers' pledges, contracts where long-distance lovers promised to write letters from every shrine visited. If one failed to send proof of devotion by a certain feast day, the pledge dissolved. You marvel at how, long before telegraphs or texts, affection already tangled itself in deadlines and faith-based accountability. Later, as the moon rises over open plains, you detour into a small roadside inn. The common room buzzes with a mix of accents and stories. At one end, a merchant boasts about his future wife from Flanders. At another, a poet sketches hearts onto spilled ale. The innkeeper's daughter delivers mugs, rolling her eyes affectionately at the chaos. "Every night's the same," she tells you. They come swearing love eternal, then leave by morning swearing geography. Still, her tone's not bitter, just amused. The world moves on, and so do hearts. Outside again, torches flicker along the route, guiding pilgrims onward. You walk beside the man from earlier, the one with the letter. He looks up at the stars, then laughs tiredly. She'll probably already be home before I reach Canterbury, he admits. But the walking feels like something sacred anyway, as if my feet could apologize for all the ways I failed to speak. You nod, thinking how love so often turns movement into meaning, no matter how hopeless. A soft drizzle begins, dotting the dirt with tiny constellations. Ahead, torchlight reflects on puddles, blurring sky and earth, until both seem endless. You overhear an elderly woman humming that same familiar tune from the village wedding a few nights ago. Its refrain, you realize, has traveled each town, each voice adding a new verse about leaving, returning, believing. In that melody, the centuries feel suddenly close. By late night, most travelers sleep under carts or canvas. A few souls sit awake, whispering names to the wind, or maybe prayers disguised as names. You pull your cloak tighter, watching mist move across the lowlands, and think how migration itself became love's truest metaphor. People move towards something they'll never see fully, guided only by faith, hunger, or longing. Historians will mark routes, record miles, and count relics collected. But love's geography exists between those lines, in glances shared on muddy paths or notes exchanged under church benches. You realize every pilgrimage trail doubled as a map of human connection, crisscrossed, tangled, and beautiful in its imperfection. Finally, the rain stops, leaving the air alive with petrichor and quiet. Torches sputter low, the road breathes. The young suitor asleep beside his pack twitches faintly, whispering his lover's name as if rehearsing it for reunion. You smile, knowing some promises never expire. They just reroute. You stretch out beside the embers, the sound of distant bells drifting through fog, and let the thoughts settle like prayer. Wherever the roads led them to sanctuaries or strangers, every traveler carried a piece of love, even if only to remember what it felt like to belong somewhere. You wake before dawn to a sound you've learned well by now, the low toll of distant bells. But this time it isn't calling town watchmen or newlyweds, it's calling monks to prayer. You're walking the narrow stone corridors of a monastery now, guided by flickering candlelight and the rustle of robes. Here, love takes on its strangest disguise, yet not gone, not denied, but transformed into devotion. You've entered a place where the human heart is supposed to forget itself, yet somehow it remembers anyway. The chapel is cold and perfect. Rows of brown-clad brothers kneel on rush mats, their voices weaving chants that rise like steady waves against the walls. No one here speaks of passion or desire, not in public. But the air itself feels saturated with longing for God, for peace, perhaps even for something nameless between those two. You sit near the back, listening. A young monk leads the psalms, voice clear and trembling in equal measure. There's something fragile in it, something that doesn't quite sound detached. You glance closer and catch the briefest glance his eyes make toward the gallery above, where the convent's nuns attend from behind carved screens. One gazes back before quickly lowering her head. So, that's how it begins. Not with sin, but with recognition. Historians still argue about how often forbidden affections bloomed inside cloisters. The answer? Often enough for church councils to keep writing new rules about mixed gatherings. Mainstream records show that some convents shared gardens or workshops with neighboring abbeys for practical reasons, copying manuscripts, brewing medicines, and sometimes practicality proved too human. Legend tells of a nun who fell in love with a monk, copying her illumination margins. Each secretly added verses of affection inside the manuscript's floral borders. Those pages eventually made their way into a cathedral library, where readers centuries later mistook them for mystic poetry. Perhaps they weren't entirely wrong. The morning continues. You watch as the brothers file silently toward the refectory, passing murals that depict celestial love saints pierced by divine light. The imagery blends agony and ecstasy so closely that separating holiness from desire feels impossible. A gray-bearded abbot catches you staring and smiles faintly. Love, he says, is not renounced here, only redirected. His tone isn't severe, it's wistful. You wonder what he redirected, and whether it ever truly left him. Near noon, You wander into the cloister garden, where vegetables thrive beside violets. A nun tends the herbs, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, humming what sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. She doesn't see you at first. When she turns, her expression is calm but curious. Visitors seldom notice we grow roses, she says, gesturing to a trellis heavy with blooms. We keep them mostly for scenting ink. You trace one soft petal, thinking aloud, it seems unfair that beauty should be trapped in words instead of worn. Her smile flickers. The vow doesn't ask us to stop noticing beauty, just to share it differently. Later, in the scriptorium, candlelight glows over parchment. The scratch of quills fills the silence as monks copy psalters and letters. You pass a desk where Latin phrases curl like vines, amor Dei est perfectio cordis. The love of God is the perfection of the heart. The words pulse with irony. How many here copy them daily, feeling their own hearts far from perfect, still tethered to memories of someone left behind? You stop near the young monk again, the one whose chant carried that quiver. A folded parchment peeks from his sleeve. When the abbot turns away, he slides it beneath a stack of manuscripts, eyes flicking toward the gallery. You shouldn't read it. Naturally, you glance. The lines are simple, almost clumsy. When I sing, it is your face the prayer becomes. Forgive me if my devotion learns your shape. You look up, startled by the honesty carved into those words. Yet you don't feel scandalized, only humbled. Even here, amid marble and silence, love refuses extinction. It merely adapts, disguising itself as piety, the same way candlelight hides beneath incense smoke. One quirky tidbit. Some medieval mystics described their visions of divine love in language so passionate that later critics wondered whether they'd mistaken spiritual rapture for something fleshlier. Saints like Bernard of Clairvaux and Mechthild of Magdeburg wrote about God's embrace and the kiss of union with imagery that raised clerical eyebrows for centuries. Historians still debate where devotion ends and desire begins, or whether it ever really does. As dusk falls, the nuns cross the courtyard to deliver fresh ink and bread. Rules forbid speech during this exchange, but words hardly matter. Eyes meet. Hands brush. Parchment passes from one world to another, and somewhere in that transaction breath quickens quietly. If holiness means abstaining from love, it's failing spectacularly in these walls. Evening prayers return, heavier now, with the scent of wax and fatigue. The same young monk lifts his voice again, steadier this time. The hymn praises the love beyond the flesh, but you recognize the tremor that humanizes his vow. Perhaps he thinks of her, perhaps of God, perhaps the line dividing them has vanished entirely. Either way, the song fills the space with something that feels truer than perfection, something honest. When the chant ends, darkness closes softly around the cloister. The abbot nods, satisfied. You see now, he tells you, why we call this place a house of love. It's just quieter about it. You walk back into the night beneath a half moon hanging where bell towers outline the stars. Behind you, prayers continue, blending with the wind until they sound almost like sighs. Maybe every monastery is proof that love never evaporates. It only changes language, finding holiness where the world forbids touch. You pause once more by the rose trellis, breathing deeply. The petals shimmer silver in the moonlight, and you remember what the nun said. Noticing beauty was never the problem. Forgetting it was. The next morning dawns crystal clear, the kind of blue that feels painted on. You walk beyond the monastery wall, following the slope down to a traveling fair pitched in the meadow below. Storytellers have gathered there, spinning tales for pilgrims, soldiers, and whoever still believes that love deserves a soundtrack. Today, you leave scribes and sermons behind for something older legend, where reality and fantasy clasp hands like hesitant partners. The crowd circles around a wooden stage where a bard strums a lute with strings frayed from use. "Knights and maidens," he cries, "fools and saints, hear the tale of love that conquers time." He winks dramatically, fully aware that nearly every story here claims the same. You squeeze between a baker and a shepherd, settling into the rhythm of his voice as it rises and falls like tidewater on sand. Historians still argue why medieval Europe obsessed over grand romances Arthur, Tristan and Isolde, Lancelot and Guinevere, when most people couldn't even read them. Yet their echoes filled every hall and cottage. Troubadours carried these narratives from market to court, wrapping moral lessons and wish fulfillment together until they became the cultural heartbeat of the age. It wasn't education, it was escape. The bard begins the famous story. A knight bound by oath and a queen bound by marriage, caught between honor and heart. You've heard it before, but something about hearing it aloud, in the open air, gives it new electricity. Around you, farmers lean close, forgetting their sore backs. A child mouths the words before the bard does. Even a friar near the edge listens too intently for neutrality. As he performs, you see faces transforming each person, grafting their own secret into the legend. That's the power of myth. It's a mirror disguised as entertainment. The knight's doubts look a little like yours. The queen's sigh resembles the widow's outside the inn. Even betrayal seems forgivable when the story's rhythm promises catharsis by the final chord. When the tale ends, applause bursts out. The bard bows, wink renewed, and launches into a lighter one, this time of a shepherdess who tricks a lord into humility, proving rustic wit outshines lineage. Laughter rolls across the field, beer sloshing, and for a moment, you sense harmony between high and low, sacred and profane, all soothed by storytelling's shared pulse. Sitting under a tree nearby, another performer hums a quieter ballad to a handful of listeners. You drift closer. His song tells of lovers who meet only once, just a single spring night before war divides them. But legend insists their reunion happens each May, when wildflowers bloom. The petals are their promises, he sings. They return even when people forget names. The refrain aches in its simplicity, and you realize why these myths outlived their tellers. They gave permanence to what daily life eroded. One quirky tidbit you overhear from a scribe keeping notes beside you. Medieval audiences didn't sit silently during performances, they reacted. Whistles, tears, shouts of advice, it was participatory heartbreak. Don't trust the sorceress. Someone yells now, to general amusement. The performer smiles mid-verse, proving heartbreak is easier to survive when everyone shares ownership of the mistake. You wander toward another tent where illuminated manuscripts are displayed for the curious. The pages shimmer with pigment, a knight kneeling beneath a lady's balcony. Another scene showing a falcon shared between lovers as a token of faith. The monk supervising the display sighs. We paint love stories to remind ourselves it's real somewhere, if not here. You ask if he ever tires of illustrating the same romantic virtues, loyalty, sacrifice, trust. He chuckles softly. Never the same story, he says. Just the same hope. Outside, dusk settles and fires pop across the meadow. The air smells of lamb, fat, cider, and damp grass. Around one fire sits an old storyteller whose voice creaks like a wooden door. Know why love stories matter? He asks his rapt audience. Because they end. We remember endings better than beginnings, and remembering keeps the heart from drying out. The circle nods, thoughtful. Even the rowdy boys go quiet, suddenly aware of how temporary laughter feels under starlight. Across the way, a tall woman recites a tale from a place far south of lovers turned into twin constellations to escape persecution. Heads tilt to find them overhead. And sure enough, two bright stars shine shoulder to shoulder, defying forever. You smile, thinking historians might dismiss this as myth. But what difference does it make? A story that survives 1,000 winters is as real as any castle ledger. You stroll through the fair's dwindling crowd until voices fade to hums. In the distance, the last bard plays softly to himself, singing into the empty night. The melody drifts like smoke and becomes indistinguishable from the whispering wind. Maybe that's how love endures here, singing long after the listeners have gone home. Tomorrow, the fair will pack up and move on, leaving only trampled grass and echoes. But tonight, surrounded by small fires and larger dreams, you realize every legend began as someone's private longing. The details, knights, dragons, divine tests, are just embroidery around the ache to be remembered. You pause at the path's edge, looking back once more at the glowing tents. Each story carries its lovers forward like lanterns through history, keeping them warm in imagination even when the real world stayed cold. In some way, you've joined them simply by listening. As you walk toward the sleeping village beyond, moonlight brushes your face and you hum that refrain. The petals are their promises. You picture wildflowers pushing through cracked stone proof that even fiction can seed reality when enough hearts believe. Maybe, you think as you go, medieval people weren't telling romance to escape their lives at all. Maybe they told it because it was the only way to make their lives larger, softer, truer, for one song, one heartbeat, one story at a time. By the time you wake, the fairgrounds are empty. The wind has swept away the laughter, the tents, and the stories, leaving only grass flattened in rings where dancers once turned. The world feels quieter now, as if catching its breath after centuries of chatter about romance, marriage, duty, longing, and dreams. You've wandered far through candlelit castles and muddy villages, through scandal and poetry, through tenderness inked into parchment and whispered in smoke. And now, standing on this road where legend dissolves into dirt, you start to see the horizon of the modern world taking shape. A merchant cart creaks past, bells jangling on a harness. The man nods as you greet him, his clothes simpler than a noble's, but brighter than a peasant's. Somewhere between worlds, merchants have begun turning love into letters, favors, wearable promises sold to anyone with a coin. You trail alongside him as he boasts of his new goods. Venetian glass mirrors, perfect for admiring one's conscience, he jokes. Then, more seriously, or for realizing you want to look good for someone specific, he winks. Even affection has become a market trend. Historians will later call this the dawn of modern courtship. Towns are growing, guilds are rising, individuality is creeping into daily life. Marriage may still bind families, but now people meet at markets, guild feasts, pilgrim inns. Freedom expands not from rebellion, but from proximity. Love, once trapped in parchment and gilded cages, begins walking freely among the crowd. You follow the merchant into the nearest town, where the street bursts with motion. Young apprentices hurry to workshops, pausing to grin at washerwomen who pretend not to notice. Bells toll from the church, calling for order in a town that hums with improvisation. On one corner, a group of students recite verses by some new poet from Italy. Something about gentle love made wise by reason. You catch the rhythm of it. Less divine longing, more human tenderness. They call it Renaissance thinking. You call it the moment love stops apologizing for being earthly. At the tavern, two travelers debate this loudly. Love is nobler when it suffers in silence, insists one, pounding his mug. Nonsense, says the other, wiping foam from his beard. We suffer enough from taxes. Love should laugh out loud. Around them, nods and laughter mingle. You listen, realizing that this argument is about to become an era's defining question. Is love meant to humble or to free? A young scribe near the back of the room sketches something on parchment, a heart symbol pierced by an arrow. It's crude, small, but instantly recognizable. It spreads along trade routes faster than any saint's relic, printed onto playing cards and scrawled in margins by the hopeful and the heartbroken alike. You watch him fold the paper into quarters and slip it to the barmaid with a shy shrug. She stifles a giggle, unfolding the first rough draft of what will one day decorate every modern Valentine. Outside, a new sound enters the streets. Printing presses, squealing and rhythmic, spitting sheets of pamphlets that carry stories, poems, and love letters in languages ordinary people can finally read. One enterprising printer sells entire volumes of love advice, claiming to translate the secrets of noble wooing for common hearts. You flip through one half superstition, half sincerity. Its pages smell of ink and revolution. For the first time, Love belongs to anyone who can afford a coin and a dream. And yet, even as everything changes, something ancient persists. In the square stands a statue of a knight kneeling before his lady, weathered but still noble. A group of children toss crumbs at pigeons gathered on his shoulder. They mimic his pose laughingly, pointing sticks like swords. Behind the game, there's inheritance proof that the ideals of chivalry never truly fade. They just shrink to fit smaller stages. You wander toward the city gate. A young couple lingers there, fingers intertwined, whispering the sort of promises that haven't changed since the dawn of language. "Right," she pleads. "I'll send word by traders if I can," he promises. They exchange tokens. She gives him a wooden ring. He fastens her scarf around his wrist. It's not silk or gold, but the gesture carries the same defiance you've seen in every century love naming itself despite uncertainty. One scholarly clerk watching nearby shakes his head and murmurs, "Romance is fickle." You smile at the irony. From what you've seen, it's the one constant that refuses extinction. Empires collapse faster. As the sun sets, you climb a nearby ridge. The town unfolds below like a tapestry woven from color and clamor. Lovers meeting in fountains, wives bartering alongside husbands, children chasing imaginations too fast for consequence. The air thrums with energy, the kind that suggests the world is inventing itself anew, blending old faith with new freedoms. You sit down in the grass, watching shadow fall over rooftops. For a moment, time feels elastic again. The medieval world you've walked through isn't disappearing, it's changing language. Chivalry becomes courtesy, devotion softens into sentiment, duty evolves into choice. But in all of it, the gestures, glances, heart-shaped sketches, the same hunger glows. To be seen, remembered, cherished. You think back to everyone you've met. The perfumed noble who used rosemary to disguise nerves, the widow who folded her mourning veil away in quiet triumph, the monk whose prayer turned into a love poem he'd never admit to writing. Each of them believed their love was unique. Each carried the same pulse. Now, standing here, you understand, that pulse never belonged to a century at all. It's been the same language underneath every costume history makes us wear. The wind lifts faintly, carrying the smell of ink, bread, and lavender. Church bells toll somewhere behind the hills. In the distance, you imagine the poet's voice calling again, whether troubadour or modern songwriter. What's the difference? It's all one story, told under countless moons. A final thought crosses your mind as stars kindle. For all its rules and rituals, the medieval world never managed to outlaw wonder. Even now, across time, you feel that same ache in the chest, the tug of connection, simple and stubborn. The details will change. The heart, apparently, refuses to. You smile into the dark. Maybe that's what progress really means in the history of love, not invention, but remembering better. Night settles like velvet across the distant ridge, and for a long moment the world feels still caught between then and now, between torchlight and tomorrow. You begin to walk again through faint starlight, hearing echoes of everything you've witnessed. The laughter of peasants by the wedding fire, the chants of lonely monks, the flutter of silk ribbons against armor, and the whisper of parchment brushed by trembling fingers. You're almost at the end of this long stroll through centuries, yet somehow it feels as though you're returning rather than leaving. You find yourself passing an ancient stone bridge crossing a narrow river. The water below glints silver, rippling like memory. You pause there, leaning on the worn rail, feeling the coolness of the stones under your palm. Someone once stood here too, maybe a courier hurrying to deliver a secret letter, maybe two lovers saying their final goodbye before taking different roads. For all the thousands of such goodbyes that have happened since, the bridge remains, patient as love itself. You keep walking. The road curves toward the ruins of an old manor half swallowed by ivy. Its walls crumble, the roof long gone, but larks nest in the empty window arches. Stories linger in its silence. Betrothals made here, secrets whispered in candlelight, dreams traded for comfort or bravery. You imagine the people who lived within those rooms, lovers who thought their stories small, never suspecting that centuries later their choices would shape the myths you now hum through twilight. Historians still argue over the meaning of medieval love. Some call it prudence masked as poetry, others, a form of devotion polished by repression. But as you look back over all you've seen, the debates seem almost funny. Every century remakes romance in its own language, but the emotion itself, messy, luminous, unmanageable, just keeps outliving definitions. Off the road, a field glows faintly under moonlight. You wander into it, brushing fingertips against tall grass. The sound is almost a whispering applause, gentle, approving. You think of that perfumed hall where court poets compared love to divine perfection, of the fields where peasants flirted by splashing each other with water, of the nun who said beauty could be shared in silence. If love in the medieval age had a lesson, it's that no single version of it was ever enough. It needed every contradiction, sacrifice, and joy, piety, and defiance to stay real. Perhaps that's the secret reason we still look back on that era with fascination. Beneath all the sermons and constraints, the people you met were secretly inventing the vocabulary of feelings still in use today: tokens, vows, heartbreak, and hope. They carried affection carefully, like flame cupped against wind, and passed it forward generation by generation until it reached us intact. That's not outdated, that's endurance. A shooting star streaks faintly across the dark horizon. You follow its arc like a punctuation mark ending a book too rich to close. The breeze shifts, carrying the damp breath of river moss, followed by something softer, the faint, ghostly scent of rosemary and lavender, as if some medieval dream still lingers here, refusing to fade. In the distance, you hear the faint chime of a bell, maybe from a far-off chapel or a clock tower marking midnight. You listen, counting the rings until they slow into silence. Around you, the world feels both ancient and alive. And somewhere, within you, the heartbeat of 1,000 forgotten lovers continues to echo steady, patient, certain. You take a deep breath of night air and picture them all. The lady who hid her laughter behind a veil, the knight who carried her ribbon into battle, the widow watching sunrise over her second chance, the monk breaking his vow for a letter no one would ever read. You realize now that none of them were so different from anyone alive today. They wanted exactly what still fills our songs and stories to matter to someone, if only briefly: to be seen, to be remembered, to love and be loved before morning bell tolls again. You smile, because somewhere, this same moon once lit their steps across the same uneven paths. The same breeze tangled in their hair. The same stars overheard their words and quietly promised to keep them. Time, it seems, never really ends a love story. It just changes the pronouns. You glance back one last time at the crumbling manor and the meadow beyond, at every echo your midnight journey leaves behind. A soft sigh escapes you as if centuries have curled asleep in your chest. Then, almost instinctively, you whisper into the wind, "Thank you for remembering me too." Your steps slow now. Your breath deepens. The road, once crowded with history's noise, is quiet. The stars shimmer softly overhead, stretching infinite and kind. Everything feels slower, softer, easier to carry. The air tastes of cool grass and distant bells, the kind of gentle darkness that invites rest rather than fear. You find a place by the riverbank and sit, letting the earth steady your pulse. The world breathes in and out. You match its rhythm without effort. Somewhere behind you, all those old stories begin to fade, fading not from memory, but into calm. The laughter from festival fires, the whispers under chapel roofs, the scratch of quills and the rustle of silk, they melt together into a lullaby older than parchment or prayer. You tilt your head back, watching a cloud drift lazily across the moon. The glow softens everything: ruins, water, even the jagged edges of time. You imagine the people you met resting now too, each folded quietly into history's comforting silence. You smile, knowing their loves never entirely vanished. They simply became part of this night, woven into wind, into memory, into the steady hush surrounding you. Beneath the whisper of reeds and the trickle of water, one final truth hums. Love has never been just noise and passion. It is patience, the kind that waits centuries to be told again, the kind that keeps the world spinning asleep or awake. You close your eyes, the sound of the river slows, the air cools your skin. And as you drift somewhere between dreaming and waking, a little voice, maybe your own, sighs softly. It's enough. It was always enough.